IB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. It's Friday. That means two things, Trevor. That's Trevor Trobers. He's with me today. I'm Brian Driscoll. It means two things. Number one, we're a day away from the game, right? In basically 26 and a half hours, we're going to be at kickoff watching Notre Dame. I'm going to be inside the stadium. You're going to be in Southwest Ohio, I believe, correct, watching the game. And we're going to find out what Notre Dame is made of this weekend. They're going to take on the Stanford Cardinal, the 2-3 Stanford Cardinal, but a Stanford Cardinal team that gave Notre Dame some problems, I would say, to put it mildly, the last time they came to Notre Dame Stadium. And so we're going to see if Notre Dame comes out of the bye week rocking and rolling and ready to show college football world, hey, we are a better team, we're a different team, we're a more locked-in team, or, hey, we're pretty much the same, and you just don't know what to expect, Trevor. I'm excited because I really am. I'm excited to see what this team looks like coming out of the bye. I very much am, and we talked a lot about it this week, and we're going to find out here in about 26 and a half hours, starting in about 26 and a half hours, what they're going to look like, and I can't wait to talk about it on the postgame show. I will be on this week's postgame show because that guy right there can't be part of the postgame show, and Vince is on a college visit. Sometimes when you hire somebody, it's like, well, I guess you've already kind of got that planned. I can't make you cancel all your plans because I'm not a jerk, but we're excited to see it. You never know. Trevor may not be able to help himself at some point in time. I have to sneak into a closet or somewhere at his in-laws' house and jump in for a minute. I'm kidding. But a lot to talk about today, Trevor. We've broken this game down. We talked all week about the things that we're intrigued by and curious about and interested in this matchup. Today, the great part about today is the fans. The IB Nation gets to decide what we're going to talk about. And we've already got 55 questions starred. Just a reminder, folks, if you want to get a question in, hit that MB or the mailbag emoji so that we know it's not just normal conversation in the chat, but we know that it's a question you want answered. If you want your question raised to the top and ensured that we don't miss it, because we probably won't be able to get to all of them today, then just do a super chat, and we'll get to that right away. And Trevor, we have a couple super chats to start things off with. But first, man, I wanted to find out, how are you doing, man? You ready? You ready for this weekend?
I'm ready. I'm excited. It's almost game day. The bye week was refreshing. Had a chance to sit back, relax, and actually watch some games. But now we're back in the swing of it. I miss watching those gold helmets run out on Saturday. So I'm ready to go, man. Let's do it.
It does seem like it's been a long time, even though it's not even been 2 full weeks yet. It just feels like a lot's changed. Lots changed since then. So, Trevor, I look at, I wanted to quickly remind people of a couple things before we get started. Number one, hit that like button before we get started. Hey, another thing is I see people comment about the length of our shows. Just fine. You can have whatever feeling that you have about that. But I want to remind people that all of our shows are broken up into segments by topic and posted as videos or posted on our podcast platform where you can just type in Irish Breakdown Podcast. So if you're someone who complains about the 3-hour shows, we're not going to do shorter live shows. Live shows are different than recorded shows. When you're like, oh, that guy only did a 30-minute show because he just sat down and recorded a 30-minute segment. That's fine. Go for it. Live shows are going to be longer the way that we do it. But for those who don't want longer shows, go to our videos tab, which all the stuff that we upload in every show, because we do them in segments and different topics. Every segment is broken into a different video, or you can pop up the podcast app, because the same thing. We do not upload entire segments or entire shows into the podcast platform. We break them down into different segments. So when we do game records, we have one for offensive game records. We have one broken down for defensive game records. We have one, yesterday's shows got broken down into keys to victory offense, keys to victory defense, score predictions. And then of course we have the IB top, or the thing we do with Bill Bender. So 4 different segments from yesterday. So if that's something that bothers you, I want to get that out of the way now. Know that we are accommodating. Some people like longer shows, and if we stop doing longer shows, then those people don't get to whet their appetite the way that they want. If you're someone who likes a shorter show, we've literally accommodated it for you by cutting these shows. I literally pay someone to cut the shows into smaller segments so that you guys can get what you want as well. So make sure you can check that out, and then you don't have to complain about how long the shows are anymore because we've given you shorter segments. Imagine that, trying to reach to everybody. So I wanted to make sure we got that out of the way before we jump in today's podcast. So Trevor, it's officially mailbag time. 5 minutes in, got our intro out of the way. We're ready to rock and roll, man. So let's go ahead and get things started. We have a couple super chats, and we'll start things off with my guy, Rob Osgood, with a super chat. Thank you so much, Rob.
Thank you, Rob. How many times do you think Marcus Freeman showed that Stanford game from 2 years ago? You said it best. This team plays better pissed off. Attitude and classy bullyism goes a long way.
You know, Trevor, I'm not sure how much he showed it, and I don't think it's really necessary to show it. Simply, it's a different coaching staff. So I don't know how much practically you get from showing it. I think more so it's about reminding the players about the game, right? It's about letting them know, hey, listen, you know, last time a 1-4 Stanford team came in here who was not as good as this Stanford team, not as dangerous as this Stanford team, and beat us. Last year, a team that's not as good as this Stanford team, and I don't think Stanford was as good last year as they are last year. Even by the end of the year, this is a much more competitive Stanford team than it has been. It's still not a great team or even a good team, but it's a much more competitive team, well-coached team. There's some young players in the talent that you're like, boy, in a couple years, these like, what's their running back room going to look like in 2 years with Micah Ford and Chris Davis, who are both freshmen? Like, they're going to be really good there, doing some really good things. The receiver, you know, obviously Emmett Mosley is there. He's a dual Notre Dame legacy. With his mom was an even better soccer player here than his dad was a football player here. So they're on their way. But it's just about reminding them about, you know, hey, guys, this is not a team to sleep on. This is a team that beat us 2 years ago. I'm sick and tired of hearing about the loss of Stanford, the loss of Stanford, the loss of Stanford, something along those lines, and make sure that you remind guys like, hey, listen, we've got something to prove. We are a football team that still is doubted. We are still a football team that people don't believe in. We still have people that don't think you can do this and don't think you can do that. I mean, I'd have my interns on message boards and YouTube channels taking some of the ridiculous things that I see from fans. Some are Notre Dame fans, some are not, about, oh, this team is this, and that we're not talking about valid criticism. Like, hey, I don't know which version of Notre Dame's going to show up every week. That's a valid criticism. This team's not that good. They're, you know, okay, I'd be kind of having some of that. Say we're doubted. People don't respect us, and just do something to inspire your team to get them to come out pissed off, because this is not an opponent that in and of themselves watching film is going to warn like, we better bring our A game this Saturday. It should be that way, but we're dealing with teenagers, a lot of teenagers and some young 20-somethings who don't always look at it that way. So those are things that I would do, Trevor, that would hopefully inspire this team, because as we've talked about, this team is better when they're pissed off. I just don't know that actually showing the film, unless you're showing like the celebration of Stanford's players at the end of the games. Not that they did anything wrong. They were just celebrating on your home field. And it's like, remember what that felt like.
I agree. I don't have much more to add here, Brian. I don't think it's going to just be almost like a movie-esque type of replay of the game to remind kids of what happened. I think it's just a lot of constant messaging of, if you haven't learned anything from week 2 of this football season, teams are looking to come in here and beat you. You have to show up and prepare the correct way every day. So I'm with you. Super chat from Tyler Evans. Thank you, Tyler. Who do you think is going to win each Power 4 conference today from your preseason picks you had, and who is your surprise?
Well, my preseason prediction in the Big Ten was Ohio State. Trevor, you weren't with us yet when we did that. I'm curious who you had as your conference champions. I had Ohio State winning the Big Ten. I had Ohio State beating Oregon in a rematch. Now, I've thought that Penn State could maybe be that team, and this weekend's going to be big for them. Penn State's been really good on defense, good in the trenches. Their skills a little, they haven't been super great on offense the last couple weeks. But I think this is a more physical Penn State team than they've been in past years, and we'll see how they go. But like, I'm a little more confident that it's not just a 2-man race, which is what I thought it was going to be coming into the season. Partly Oregon's not quite as good. Penn State's a little bit better, but Ohio State's still so far been the class of the Big Ten. We'll find out a little bit about that this weekend. So Big Ten wise, Trevor, I still feel it's Ohio State. That was my pick coming in the season. Did you have sort of your personal favorite for who you thought was going to win the Big Ten?
Ohio State was mine going into
still. Do you still feel that way?
Yeah.
Okay. SEC, I'm trying to remember. I think I had Alabama winning the SEC coming into the season. I had Texas being the top seed going into the SEC championship game, and then I had Bama winning in the SEC title game. I'm not as confident in that one, although I'm not overreacting to the Vanderbilt loss the way that a lot of other people are. Bama's in trouble. Kalen DeBoer can't win there. And I'm like, are our memories and our attention spans really that bad that we don't remember they beat Georgia like a week ago? I literally have people saying Georgia should be ranked ahead of Alabama. Why? Because Bama lost to Vanderbilt. Okay, it's a bad loss. Are we just going to ignore everything else that happened? Like, I don't know, like a week before when they beat Georgia and outplayed them for, I'd say 50 out of 60 minutes, thoroughly outplayed them, so I'm not as confident in that one. And I think there's a couple other teams that could challenge. I'm really curious to see, I wish, Tyler, you would have asked me this question next week. Because there's some games we're going to learn a lot about Ole Miss, for example. Because, right now it's like, well, Ole Miss is too up and down. We don't know who they are. They're kind of like the SEC version of Notre Dame. Lane Kiffin from year to year has not been able to put back-to-back seasons together. I'm going to feel a whole lot different about Ole Miss after this weekend if they beat LSU on the road. Not that LSU is like gangbusters, but playing in Baton Rouge at night against a good LSU team, and this is a good LSU team. It's not a great LSU team. I don't think they're SEC title contenders. I don't think they're a national title contender anywhere close to that. This is still a good LSU team that's going to win 9 or 10 games this season in the regular season, right? You go to their place at night on the, big time game, and you handle business, then I'm going to feel a lot different about this team. So right now, I still think Bama and Texas are the two best teams in the SEC. But Ole Miss is a team that I'm watching for right now. I'm not in the Texas A&M could win the SEC conversation yet because, yes, it was a good win last week, but I never thought Missouri was that good. So I need to see how they perform against a top team. And so far, the only top team that they've played, not highly ranked team, because Missouri's highly ranked. I don't think Missouri's that good. Said so before the season. It's Notre Dame, and they lost at home by 10. But they are good. So it's going to be a competitive situation, Trevor. I don't think Bama losing to Vanderbilt is going to have the impact some people think it will, because there's a lot of potential L's on people's schedules, including potentially Bama's if they don't kind of grow up a little bit as a team and come together a little bit. But I still feel like those two teams are the teams to beat. Now, I had Bama winning it. I'm not as confident, certainly not as confident of that happening, because right now, if I'm looking at today, that Texas offense against that Bama defense could look a lot like last year, right? You know what I mean? Or if not a little bit worse, and if they don't get better. So right now, that's one where I've changed my preseason prediction. I still have the same top two, but instead of having Bama win in the SEC title game, right now, if I had to do it again, I'd have Texas win in the SEC title game. But again, we'll find out a lot more over the next couple weeks because Texas plays Oklahoma this weekend, and then they have Georgia next weekend. So we'll have something to compare it to.
For me, with the SEC, I started out the season by predicting Texas winning the SEC. There are a lot of question marks with me. I love Kalen DeBoer, and I think he's a great coach, but I just didn't know how Alabama was going to be with him starting out the new regime. So right now, I'm still going to keep Texas as who I think it's going to be. There's going to be a lot that has to be proven. I do think Alabama has the most impressive win over Georgia so far in the SEC, but Texas still has to play Oklahoma this week, and then I believe the week after they play Georgia at home, and then they have to finish out the season at Texas A&M. So originally the win over Michigan held a lot more weight than what it did because we started to see what Michigan was going to be as a complete football team shortly after that. So right now I'm still with Texas, but I definitely hear all the arguments for Alabama and potentially what Texas A&M has coming up the pipeline too.
Yeah. It's funny. I actually predicted A&M to beat Texas at the end of the regular season. I had that as Texas's only regular season loss. So I kind of feel less confident about that now. If A&M keeps winning and they're 10-1 going into, or 9-1 going into that game, I actually am less confident because then Texas is going to be kind of up, but I had them at like 8-3, middle to the bottom of the top 25. Texas kind of overlooks them a little bit, rivalry game, but
sure.
It is. That's what I love about it. Hey, look, we made these predictions, man. Now let's see what we got right and what we got wrong, and everybody's going to get some right. Everybody's going to get some wrong. ACC, I had Florida State and Clemson playing in the regular season. I believe I had Florida State winning in the regular season. and then I had Clemson winning in a rematch. I definitely don't see that as having changed. Now, I still have the same team winning the ACC. I still think Clemson's the best team in the ACC right now. I do believe that. But right now, Miami's clearly number 2, and Florida State's clearly like not even close to this conversation. So that's one team I got way wrong in the offseason. Just did not see this collapse coming. And I know some people that thought they weren't going to be that good this year. I'd be curious who really saw this coming. Like, this has just been way, way bad. So my champion hasn't changed, but my conference title game contenders definitely has changed. As of right now, I see Miami, Louisville, and Pitt right now kind of jockeying for who's going to be number 2. Pitt's got a couple legitimately good wins so far. Nobody's talking about them. And I'm curious to see what they're able to do these next couple weeks as they get ready to kind of go out and prove that this isn't a fluke. Now people have some film on what they're doing, and it's going to be interesting. Get Cal at home this weekend. Got Syracuse at home next week, and there's at least a solid chance that Pitt's going to be 7-0 heading to SMU in November. So it's going to be very interesting, very interesting. But Clemson is still my champ. Who they're going to beat on the way to get there has changed. Like, for me, I had Clemson going 10-2 in the regular season, losing to Georgia, then losing to Florida State, and then avenging that Florida State loss, and then getting the automatic bid. Right now, I don't have anybody on Clemson's schedule beating them the rest of the way. They've got Wake on the road this week, home against Virginia, home against Louisville, at Virginia Tech, at Pitt, home against Citadel, home against South Carolina. Louisville could upset them. Virginia Tech could upset them. Pitt could upset them. That's, you know what I mean? Like, but I think Clemson's the better team than all those teams. And then, of course, Miami's schedule is a little bit tougher down the stretch, but those are my top 2 right now. If I had to pick today, I'd pick Clemson and Miami to play, and I'd pick Clemson to win that game.
I'm in a similar boat as you. I had Florida State to start the season. I was really high on Mike Norvell, and I do still like Mike Norvell as a coach, but I kind of relied on the slew of transfers that they brought in. And I know DJ in previous spots that he was at was not lighting the world on fire, but he was still an experienced, talented quarterback. And Brian, to your point, he's not the only reason why Florida State is what they are right now. Did not think the defense was going to be like this. I think that's honestly more shocking to me than what the offense looked like, because at least on paper, you can look and say, well, the offense lost Jordan Travis and Keon Coleman and Johnny Wilson and all these guys. And sure, they're replacing them with a handful of transfers, but defense had relatively more people coming back in comparison to what the offense had. And it's just, it's shocking. But as of right now, I'm in the same boat as you, having Clemson in the ACC title game and winning.
Big 12 is as wide open as you can imagine. It is nuts. My preseason prediction to win it all was Kansas State. I still feel like they're absolutely in that conversation right now. This weekend's going to be big for that, playing at Colorado this weekend, Trevor. We talked about it with Bill Bender yesterday. This is going to be kind of a separation Saturday a little bit in the Big 12. Well, actually, and I shouldn't even say that because it starts Friday night. It starts tonight with Utah at Arizona State, 2 4-1 teams. Then, of course, you've got Colorado hosting Kansas State. You've got Iowa State playing at West Virginia. You've got BYU hosting Arizona. All of those could be upsets, or they're all potential upsets. I'm not saying they're all going to get upset. I'm saying they're potential upsets. We're going to have a much better feel about the Big 12 coming out, but I still like this Big 12 football. I still like this K-State football team, Trevor. They got a dynamic quarterback. They got one of the best running backs in college football. Their line is a typical K-State line. It's not great, just a lot of tough kids. And their defense is, with the exception of a little stretch there of about 15 minutes against BYU, has been pretty salty so far this season. There's a lot of flaws in other teams. I don't think Iowa State's a team that is in it for the long haul. We'll see. BYU, look, they're the team. They've got the best resume in the Big 12, and that was the point I was trying to make to Bill Bender yesterday. Is like, look, you can rank Iowa State ahead of BYU, but you're basing that off of your preseason notion, not what they've done so far. And but all these teams get a chance to work. These next month in the Big 12 is going to be fun to watch, Trevor. It's going to be wild. But right now, I'm still going with my preseason pick of K-State. But there's a lot more contenders for that crown. I thought there'd be 5 contenders for the Big 12. I do think there's 5, but it's not the same 5 that I had coming into the season. Kansas hasn't been as good as I thought they would be. I thought TCU was going to have a bounce back year. They're definitely not having a bounce back year. K-State's legit. Oklahoma State's struggling right now. Utah is what we thought they would be. I thought Arizona would take a step back. They have so far. Really, BYU and Iowa State are the two big surprises for me. They've been a lot better so far than I thought that they would be. And they're gonna make some noise. And again, a lot of these teams may not win it, but they're going to have an impact on who does because of how much we're going to see. That's why I don't think there's a chance for anybody for the Big 12 to get more than one team. I just think they're going to all eat themselves over the next month and a half, and it's going to be fun to watch. It really is. It's good football. If you're not watching Big 12 football, guys, you're missing out. There's some darn good football coaches in the Big 12, and there's some good football being played over there. It's not best talent in the country, but it's good football, in my opinion. And it's a much tougher league. There's teams that play good defense. There's teams that are good in the trenches. It's not your what is it, your older brother's Big 12, right? Because it hadn't been that long ago. It's not your daddy's Big 12, because your daddy's Big 12 looked a whole lot different than what your it was 10, 15 years ago during that Art Briles era where everybody was scoring points and nobody could stop anybody. It's a little different league than it is now, and it's fun to watch, in my opinion.
The Big 12 was really hard for me to predict. I was in the same boat as you in the preseason. I thought, just looking at all these teams on paper and what the makeup of the conference was going to be, I thought it was going to be really close. And so far, that's coming to fruition. At the end of the day, I put Utah as winning because they had Cam Rising coming back for what feels like his 12th year of college football. And Utah's defense is always going to be very solid. I mean, I think they're 15th in the country in scoring defense this year. So I had them. But to your point, I did not expect BYU to be the team that they are right now. So Big 12's wide open. Right now, I don't know if I can even confidently say who I think is going to win it. If I had to pick one, I'm just going to go with the favorite in BYU, because right now I think they're playing the best football right now in the Big 12.
Yeah, they really are. They really are. They're a good football team. So that's the super chats. You ready to get back to some of these other questions? Let's get back to an Indy Milton fan. We'll start with him for the non-super chat questions. Let's go.
Andy Milton fan asks, to this point, which Notre Dame player is having the best season?
Which Notre Dame player is having the best season? I'd say right now my prediction would probably be Xavier Watts. I think he's been their best player week after week after week. I think there's been weeks where other guys have stepped up and had really good games. I think Jeremiah Love has been obviously outstanding for Notre Dame this year. He's probably my pick for most outstanding player. We talked about this last week, right? Like, the most valuable player on offense is Riley Leonard. The most outstanding player on offense, in my opinion, has been Jeremiah Love. There's a difference between value and most outstanding. You could survive losing Jeremiah Love because you're loaded to that position. And whereas if you lose Riley Leonard, you might be in some trouble based on the way the offensive line is played. But the most outstanding player so far on offense, in my opinion, has been Jeremiah Love. And defensively, we've seen flashes from other guys. I had a friend of mine last night. He's like, yeah, Benjamin Morrison hasn't been good this season. I was like, hold on a second. Time out. You guys need to understand the difference between not playing as good as I thought he was going to play and not playing good. You can say that Benjamin Morrison hasn't been as good as you thought he was going to be, but to then say he's not even good, hold the phone. And he's had a couple really good performances. Just consistency hasn't been there the way that it has been for Xavier Watts. Where Benjamin has Northern Illinois. I didn't think Benjamin was that good. I thought Xavier Watts was like the only veteran on defense that really did anything against Northern Illinois. So he's been just consistently really good in my view. But, Howard Cross has been way up and down. Riley Mills, way too much up and down. The linebackers they're young and inconsistent. They've been good. Boubacar was flashing for a minute, and then he got hurt. Jordan Patelho was off to a good start this year. He got hurt. But nobody's just been as consistently effective and consistently dominant as Xavier Watts has been. And so he's my guy on defense, and Jeremiah Love would be my guy on offense.
I got to echo you there. I'm in the same boat. Same boat.
Yeah. I mean, is there anybody that you would consider in the conversation on either side of the ball? Or is it kind of like, for me, it's kind of clear. Those are definitely the two best.
Yeah.
So I mean, Riley Leonard's the only guy on offense, just because I know he hasn't thrown the ball as well, but just the impact he's had on the game has been pretty good, and nobody else is just in that conversation.
Yeah, I agree. I think Jeremiah Love and Xavier Watts are kind of in a league of their own right now when it comes to that. If I were to start building out like kind of almost that tier 2 list. I think you throw Christian Gray in there for what he's done this season, replacing Cam Hart. Argument could be made for a Don Schuler coming in there and elevating the safety position from what it was last year. Offensively, it's just way too much of this, man. It's tough to say because it's a smaller sample size, and I don't like to just judge a guy based on one game that he has. But the Louisville game was a little tough for Bo Collins, but I'd say offensively in the receiver room, him or Greathouse has been your most consistent. Jadarian Price arguably has been the most explosive running back.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's too much. But if I were to start building out that tier 2 list, that's kind of what I'm starting to look at there.
Yeah, agree. So it's going to be interesting to see what this conversation looks like at the end of the year. I don't know that it's going to change who our picks are, but I'm curious if there's more people in the conversation. That's going to be the interesting thing. I'll tell you what, if not for missing the Louisville game, do you know who I would have probably picked as my second best defensive player so far this season? It'd be Christian Gray. If he didn't miss the Louisville game, he probably would have been my next pick on defense. So it'll be interesting how that plays out. Yeah. Let's go to my guy, John A1.
John A1 asks, based on pure talent and ability, how does Anthony Knapp compare to Robert Hainsey?
Yeah, this is actually an interesting comparison because I actually think Anthony Knapp has more physical talent than Robert Hainsey. I think he's stronger than Robert was at a similar age. I think Anthony Knapp's a little bit better athlete than Robert Hainsey was coming out of high school. Robert wasn't a really good college football player at Notre Dame because he was huge, because he was super strong, because he was a quality athlete. He was, had good strength. He was a fighter. Like he'd compete, but he wasn't like a dominant, drive you off the ball, blow you up kind of guy. He was a competitive, smart, fundamentally sound, solid athlete type of guy, right? Where Anthony Knapp, I think, has more physical tools. My only question is he going to be able to fill out, keep that weight, and maintain athleticism? So far, he's done a pretty decent job of that. But just God-given ability, he's a little bit more talented version of that. My concerns with Anthony Knapp have to do with look, he's being thrust into a role he shouldn't have had. And he doesn't have the teaching and the instruction and the background that Robert Hainsey had, playing a whole senior year or whole junior and senior seasons at IMG Academy, which meant every single day in practice he's going against future Division I defensive linemen. That prepared Robert so much better to play as a freshman than what Anthony Knapp was prepared for as a freshman. So I know there's a lot of people that are like down on Anthony Knapp, and I understand it. And I wasn't super high on him coming out of high school. I thought he was a guy that had some potential. I think I gave him a 4.5-star upside grade, but only gave him a 3.5-star grade because there were still a lot of questions and a lot of technical things. You're still a bit raw mechanically and technically, but you could see the punch. You could see some foot quickness that I don't know that Robert had at the same age. But Robert was just polished and smart, and he would fight, and he was ready to play mentally and technically the day he showed up at Notre Dame. Anthony wasn't. Anthony had to start because of issues at other positions. So I'm actually more encouraged by his future at Notre Dame now than I was before, because I know he's not a left tackle. And when you move him inside, like what we have seen from him in the run game, I'm like, dude, I can't wait till he's playing center or guard for Notre Dame. And he can just play in a phone booth all day and has a couple years in a strength program under his belt. And he's going to be a pretty darn good football player, I think. He's just not a left tackle. And he's just not as polished. Robert was polished. But just to John's point, from a talent and ability standpoint, I think Anthony Knapp has more of that God-given tools than Robert Hainsey does. He just isn't as, ready in those other areas that are very important for offensive linemen. Very important. Technique and fundamentals and the mental part of the game are more important for an offensive lineman than any other position on offense outside of quarterback. It really is.
Yeah, totally. I agree. Robert just he was more refined at that point. And Anthony Knapp, I think, has had a stronger foundation athletically. And I think he does have a potential higher ceiling than what Robert Hainsey might have had at Notre Dame, just based on his athletic ability. But yeah, I agree.
Good question, John. And that was in the buy so hold on Saturday or Wednesday, and I didn't get a chance to get to it. So I'm glad he brought that back into the show today. So that was a good one.
Mohammed Abdi, Brian, do you think the Louisville game plan can be implemented that sacrifices the run game against triple option teams to avoid explosive passes or risk having fewer possessions?
I understand where he's coming from, but I just want to be clear. I don't think they sacrificed the run game. That's not what I'm saying. I think they were basically trying to dare them into running and didn't always execute in those instances. I don't think Notre Dame will say, hey, we're going to be perfectly fine letting the quarterback pull a read zone and run out the back door untouched. I don't think that was the game plan. I think what they did, however, is they wanted them to try to run. Within that, they needed to be more disciplined with some of their run fits on the second and third level and on the first level to a degree as well. But when you look at the triple option teams, it's really just such a different animal than what they're doing. Even if Notre Dame was a team geared towards stopping the run, Trevor, I don't think that's the same as stopping the run when you're playing a triple option team. It's just a different animal. So I don't know that I would say anything about sacrificing the run game against triple option teams to avoid explosive passes or risk having fewer possessions. I just don't think those two things have anything to do with each other. I don't think there's anything you're going to do against Louisville that you're then going to take into philosophically, structurally, or any other way into the triple option games. I don't. It's look, attack the ball, be disciplined, force early gives or pitches, rally to the football, and be smart. And that's really what it boils down to for Notre Dame. I mean, it really is that. It really is that.
I agree. And Mohammed, I hear where you're coming from, and I understand the basis of your question. But when you start comparing apples to apples here, Navy has the 117th ranked passing offense in the country when it comes to yards per game. I think more the reason why they did it for Louisville is because Louisville, as of right now, is the 14th ranked passing offense in the country, and they average 303 passing yards a game. So the thought was, I don't want to call it like a pick your poison, because I do still believe that Notre Dame has to do a good job of stopping the run against Louisville, but they just have to do well enough, because Louisville's offense wasn't centered around running the football and Navy's is. So that I think is the difference. I hear you, because Navy, it's, in years past, you watch them play Notre Dame and it's, triple option this, run right, run left, midline, right up the middle. And then you have that one play action where there's a tight end with, nobody 10 yards around him. So I hear you in that stance, but Navy's not a team that's going to line up and spread and pick you apart for 4 quarters. They're just not.
What it comes down to, Trevor, and I love how you put it, it's against Louisville, Notre Dame said, we're going to limit your effectiveness with what you do best and force you to beat us with what you don't do best. That philosophy can be carried over to Navy from the standpoint of, okay, if you're going to beat us, you're not going to beat us throwing the football. Now, you may beat us with some big plays in the passing game because we as a defense aren't disciplined and we're giving up yards and big plays, but then you're just not good. But if, like, hey, we're shutting down the run and you're going to, quote unquote, beat us with the throwing game, I'll take those odds if I'm Notre Dame, right? And that's what say, look, yeah, fine. Your outside receivers are going to have to beat Benjamin Morrison and Christian Gray consistently and Xavier Watts consistently on wheel routes and stuff like that. So I don't see it that way. It's as far as like sacrificing the right. It's take away what they do best, stop what they do best, and force them to beat you with something else. And if they do, more power to them. And that was what was so frustrating about the Northern Illinois game plan, is because I didn't feel Notre Dame did what they needed to do defensively to say, hey, we're going to take away what you do best and force you to beat us. They allowed Northern Illinois to dictate the action of that game. And you can't allow that to happen against the triple option teams. And that's something Notre Dame did it was weird to see different coordinators have different reactions to playing the triple option. And you'd see Notre Dame, there was a year, I'm trying to remember when it was, where Notre Dame played like 1.5 yards off the ball. A yard off the ball. What was it like? I think it was 14 or 15, somewhere around there. And you're just like, what are you doing? Because they were like, well, maybe this is what you're playing into their hands by reacting that way. Like, you're allowing them to dictate. And then there'd be the years where they would just kind of, hey, look, we're going to aggressively attack gaps and be sound. And they would blow Navy up, and it's like, hey guys, there's a theme here. And, it's like with any other type of read type of concept. Attack it, force them to declare as quickly as possible. The longer you let the ride happen, the longer you let the quarterback extend, the longer you do all those things, the more chance they're going to have to get that ball into space. Attack it. And we'll see if they do that or not. I'm curious to see what Al Gold does. Because, like, year one, he had a really good plan early against Navy. They made some adjustments, and he had no answers in the second half against that triple option. Last year, they dominated it, and here's the thing. They forced Navy to try to beat them deep. And you say, wow, there's a couple guys open last year in that game where if Navy hits this pass or that, and that's the point, because they're not going to hit those passes a ton. Now, they've done a better job of that this year. If you look at their yards are not good, but their yards per attempt is way higher than it's been in recent years. And so they're a lot more efficient and explosive in the throwing game, but they're not throwing the ball 30 times a game. And that's where you got to be careful. But again, 2 or 3 big plays in the pass game is not going to beat you unless you also give up 200 some rushing yards and let them control the game. If you take that away, they can't beat you. I don't care what they do in the throwing game. It means they may get 17 points, but it's not going to beat you because of their offense. Your offense may suck, but they're not going to beat you that way, in my opinion. Good questions, everybody. We've got some good stuff today. Let's go down here to Aiden Banami.
Aiden Banami asked, just one player who is the most improved up to this point.
It's a good question. Most improved. Well, up until the moment he got hurt, it was Jordan Patojo for me.
Mm-hmm.
He was way better than he was a year ago. Most improved. So offensively, I assume there's 2 ways to look at it, Aiden, and I'm not sure which one you mean. Most improved compared to last season or most improved from the beginning of the season? I'm looking at it, Trevor, from last season.
Okay.
It's kind of how I'm viewing the question. And it's interesting because you had so many guys kind of coming in and out of the lineup that it's kind of hard to tell. And you almost want to cheat and go with a guy that didn't play a whole lot last year, like Drake Bowen, somebody like that. Because I don't know that Benjamin Morrison, even if he was playing like a first-team All-American, would be improved. I think Xavier Watts has improved parts of his game, but how is he most improved? He's a consensus All-American or unanimous All-American last year. Here's one for me offensively. Emil Wagner. That's my one on offense. Emil Wagner, because I had legitimate concerns about his ability to hold up at right tackle based on what I saw from him in practice and in games last year. Like, really had some concerns about his ability to hold up and pass pro. He struggled against Louisville because they were throwing stuff at him. They didn't handle it well, like mentally, which the entire line struggled with that. But he has been a lot better and a lot more consistent player than I thought he would be. And if he did play well, honestly, Trevor, I thought it was going to be flashy. He's going to have some really good games built around some not very good games. The Louisville game, he didn't play very well. But outside of that, I thought Emil has been really steady this season. Not great, not dominant, just steady. And I would love to have 5 steady offensive linemen right now. With this backfield, that's all you need. And we had an interesting question about that we'll get into that more. But you know what? Now, as I talk through it, Emil's my pick on offense. And you know who my pick on defense would be of guys that actually played last year and are playing now? Donovan Heinisch struggled in the first couple games and had the same struggles he had last year, just when big guys can kind of – last 3 games, I think Donovan Heinisch has been really, really active and effective for Notre Dame and playing really good football. He'd probably be my pick on defense of the guys that played. Because it'd be easy to cheat. Like, well, Drake Bowen has 10 times more tackles now than he did, or twice as many tackles now as he did last year, all of last year. But that's because he didn't play. I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, it's easy for that. I'll go Heinisch. It would be my pick for most improved on defense, Trevor. What are you thinking as far as guys that you look at?
On offense, I was going to go with the Emil Wagner route. So just to not beat a dead horse, I'm going to throw in.
Good pick, Trevor. It's a good
Thank
pick.
you.
I like
you. I appreciate
on this one.
You know what, man? I just had a gut feeling. But no, honestly, another one of mine, and I'll explain here in a second, but I'm going to throw Jeremiah Love in that conversation because he played last year. But I think there's aspects of his game this year that are a little better. I think he's a more patient runner this year. I think that his leg drive is better than it was last year. I think he's able to finish runs better. So as far as
patient.
people who, as far as people who have played, I'm going to throw Jeremiah Love in that.
That's a good one.
Too.
That's a good one, Trevor. I didn't even think about that. That's a real good one.
Yeah, and then for defense, another person I'm going to throw in also along the D line, but I think Junior Tuihalamaka has played significantly better than what he did last year too. And I think it might have been you that I was talking with about this, but I think the first 2 games he had 0 snaps.
0 snaps. We were talking about it in the show. He had 0 defensive snaps in the first 2 games. He did not actually step on the field as a defensive player until after Jordan Patel got hurt, and immediately started making plays in that Purdue game.
Yep, 100%.
That's a good one. I didn't even think about that. It's a real good one, Trevor.
So Junior will be mine on defense.
Yeah, it's a really good one. Really, and he's been even better the last couple of games than Donovan Hinish. So that's a really good one. I'm sitting there thinking like Patel Hono, Bubakar. I didn't even think about Junior. So that's a really good one. Really good one. You had the pick against Miami of Ohio, had a great read on a jet sweep in that game that he sniffed that out. And that's a really good one. Really good one. I don't like when I don't even think about it. I'm like, I had him number 2. Don't worry about it. I didn't even think about him. So that's a good one, Trevor. I like that.
Thank you. Stonator. Long way to go, but if Notre Dame is able to go undefeated the rest of the season, what seed would you expect them to get in the college football playoff?
I'm going to say somewhere between 5 and 7 is the range. It's hard for me to say definitely there'll be 5, there'll be 6, there'll be 7, because there's so much. My optimism about them getting the 5 seed is raised now because of some of the upsets we've seen in college football. Right? Like Tennessee and Alabama both getting beat by an unranked team means that neither one of them, or there's no world in which both of them have 1 loss compared to Notre Dame's 1 loss because they play each other. So one of them's going to have to lose again. You look at, you look at Georgia and you say Georgia and Ole Miss both have 1 loss. Ole Miss lost to an unranked team. So what does that mean? That means that's guaranteed that one of those 2 teams will have a second loss. So Bama, Georgia, and Ole Miss, LSU, and who's the other one that we were just talking about? Tennessee. It's not possible for any more than one of those teams to have fewer than 1 loss. It's just not possible because they're going to have to beat each other. And then you get into a situation where, okay, well then – let's say Georgia beats all of them, so they knock Ole Miss out. They give Texas a loss. Okay, well then Texas and Georgia play each other again. One of them is going to get a second loss, right? So either Texas wins out and they have no losses, or they beat Georgia in one of the 2 games where they play each other, and Georgia gets a second loss. You know what I mean? So when you look at it, Trevor, it's like what happened in the SEC has made that a lot more likely that Notre Dame gets a 5 or a 6. Now you look at the Big Ten. That's where it could get a little bit hairy for Notre Dame because there's a universe in which Ohio State beats Oregon and Penn State. One of them does not go to the Big Ten title game and get a second loss because you know what I mean? So like when you look at the schedules, Penn State has to play Ohio State this year, and they play Ohio State on November 2nd at home. Let's say they lose to Ohio State. They don't play Michigan. They don't play Oregon. Their other games are, assuming they win this weekend, they play at Wisconsin. That's very winnable. Home against Washington, home against Maryland, at Purdue, at Minnesota. That's where you could kind of get into all right, that league could kind of jack with you. So let's say Oregon beats Ohio State this weekend. Ohio State beats Penn State. Penn State runs the table. Somehow, based on tiebreakers, Oregon has to either play Penn State in the Big Ten title game, which I don't think is possible because I think Ohio State would get the rematch. But then Ohio State would finish 11-1, or Oregon would play Penn State or play Ohio State in a rematch. And then let's say Ohio State wins the rematch, and now you've got Oregon with 1 loss, Ohio State with 1 loss, and Penn State with 1 loss. At least one of them is going to be ranked ahead of Notre Dame. Now, maybe you get 1 Big Ten team and 1 SEC team ahead of Notre Dame, but you're not going to get a third of those 2 teams. So that's why I say 5 to 7. I don't think you're going to have a Big 12 team ranked ahead of them. I don't think you're going to have an ACC team ranked ahead of them, when it all comes down to it. So that's why I'm actually a believer that Notre Dame's chances of getting a 5 to 7 if they win out are much greater now than they were 2 weeks ago, before Ole Miss caught a loss 2 weeks ago to Kentucky at home, who's unranked. You had Vanderbilt beating Alabama. You had Arkansas beating Tennessee. Like, they're not eating each other yet. They haven't even got to playing each other yet outside of Bama and Georgia. And so the odds of there not being more than one SEC team with a loss, the only way that could happen is if actually it can't. I don't know that it can happen now, because if Georgia beats Texas next weekend, well, then Texas can't lose another game, and Georgia doesn't lose another game. One of them is then guaranteed to get a second loss. So it's going to be hard for there to be a whole lot of one-loss teams in the SEC because of the way the SEC schedule is structured, and because several of those teams have now lost games to not each other. Does that make sense? So, and then obviously LSU has already lost to USC. So if they don't run the table and literally win the SEC, they're going to have a second loss. So there's been a lot of losses that aren't to each other. So they're not eating their own yet at the top. And when we get into that stretch, the SEC is going to eliminate itself. The Big Ten doesn't have that problem because Ohio State plays Oregon and Ohio State plays Penn State, but Penn State and Ohio and Oregon don't play each other, and Penn State doesn't have to play Michigan. Not that they lose to Michigan, but like that's the perceived other top team. Right. And then Penn State also doesn't have, they play Washington, but they get Washington at home. So the Big Ten put a far more favorable product on schedule for its top teams, perceived top teams, than the SEC did. The SEC gave its top teams much tougher slates. Outside of Texas, who actually has a pretty favorable schedule they don't play Bama and they get Georgia at home. So it's not an easy schedule. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying Texas has an easy schedule. They've got to play Georgia at home. They got to play Oklahoma in a neutral field. They got to play at Texas A&M. But they don't get Tennessee, they don't get Alabama, they don't get Ole Miss, and they don't get LSU. Their conference is Mississippi State, Oklahoma, Georgia, Vandy, Florida, Arkansas, Kentucky, Texas A&M. So the newcomer got the best in-conference schedule amongst the top teams, easily.
Yeah, 100%. That's why they were my pick at the start of the season to win the SEC. One, because of the makeup of the team, but two, just what their schedule looks like and who they have to play within the SEC. For this one, Stoneator, it's interesting. I don't know if I can predict an exact number. I do believe if Notre Dame runs the table and goes 11-1, they get a home field game. So they're going to be somewhere in that 5 to 8 range. So not gonna echo it too much, but I think they just get a home game. Fifth, I think would be a stretch. They would need some stuff to happen up above them, but it's not out of the question by any means. So I'm going to say somewhere in that 5 to 8 range to get a home playoff game.
I will say this, Trevor. 5 is much more manageable now than it was.
Sure.
They need some things to happen, right? Mm-hmm. They can't have two teams. But also Notre Dame has to play well. Like, it's not just for Notre Dame to get the 5 seed. It's not just about running the table. You've got to dominate a lot of the teams left on your schedule. That's going to be the key, right? And we'll see if they're able to do that. Because if not, if you're just kind of scraping by and beating the good teams on your schedule by 7 to 10 points, and you're having sloppy games against Miami of Ohio's and of the world. I mean, you don't have another loss, but you beat Navy, but you only do it by 10 or 7. Yeah. You beat them. Well, then they're going to look and say, well, A&M's smacking people, and they're a better team now than they were then, and we're not going to give you as much credit. But if A&M's playing better and Notre Dame's just crushing people, they're going to be like, well, Notre Dame's a way better team than they were back then too, right? That's the reality. So it can't just be winning out. Winning out gets you in, and winning out hosts a playoff game. The only disagreement I would have with you is 8 is hard for me to fathom because of everything else we talked about. I think that would require a second Big 12, a second ACC. So let's say Clemson goes 11-1, Miami goes 12-0. Clemson barely beats Miami, and if maybe then you could have that second ACC team be ahead of Notre Dame. It would require a lot to happen for it to be there, but Notre Dame will be a home team and in the playoff if they win out. There's no doubt after the last 2 weekends. I just don't. You're going to now have to maybe put a bunch of 2-loss teams ahead of them. I just don't see that happening, especially since Notre Dame has a road win against an SEC team. And they'll have a couple Big Ten wins by then because they'll have to have beaten a USC team on the road in the Big Ten. They'll have beaten Purdue. So there's going to be some, hey, You played Purdue. We played Purdue. Okay, so Penn State, you have Purdue later in the year, right? So we just talked about that, how Penn State's got to play Purdue. Okay, so they have to play at Purdue. Okay, well, we beat them by 59. If you don't beat them by more than 59, then we now have a comparable game where we can say, hey, look, you have a loss, we have a loss. We have two teams in common. You know, you play at USC, we played at USC, looking at it from the Notre Dame standpoint. So now you get into, okay, Penn State with one loss. You didn't play in your title game either. How did we do in those two games? Notre Dame has to think about that. The Purdue game, they handle their business. But if Penn State beats USC by 10, Notre Dame's going to be like, hey, we got to beat USC by more than 10 in order to lock in that higher seed. But 5 or 6, either one, is good for Notre Dame. 7, 8 gets you locked into playing the SEC or Big Ten champ in round 2. And that's not necessarily, not that they can't win that game, but that's not as ideal as getting the Big 12 or ACC champ. So it's going to be interesting, but they need to handle their business, Trevor, and not just win, but they have to look. It doesn't mean that you can't have a week where you don't dominate it, but a lot of these games need to be butt whoopings, and it needs to start this weekend, you know, because now that the way that the schedules go, like you're going to have ACC teams, Big Ten teams to compare yourself to, and you've got to go an SEC opponent that you had to play. You're going to have some, okay, we played this team, you played this team. You know, Texas is going to have to play at Texas A&M. Let's say Texas is 11-1 and somehow doesn't make the SEC title game. All right, well, we have a common opponent, right? You know, they beat you, and we beat them. So now all of a sudden 11-1 Texas, are they ranked ahead of Notre Dame? If for some reason they're left, let's say somehow by some weird stroke, Texas has one loss, Bama has one loss, and I don't even know if it's possible for another team to have a loss. Only one loss. Let's say Texas A&M. Let's say that. Let's say Texas A&M runs the table, Bama runs the table. If that happens, actually, does Bama play A&M? Because that might not be possible either. You see where I'm coming? Yeah, they don't play A&M, so that's actually possible. If A&M runs the table, goes 11-1, Bama runs the table, they both go 11-1. For A&M to be 11-1, they have to beat Texas in the last game of the year. Say, well, you know, Texas was number 1 when that happened, because if Texas wins out, they're probably ranked number 1, no worse than 2. But then if you're Notre Dame at 11, we say, yeah, but we have a common opponent. We played that same team at their place and beat them by 10. You played them at their place and got beat. Now Notre Dame has a case to be ranked higher because Texas doesn't have that gauntlet of an SEC schedule where they had to play Bama and you know they'd have the win over Georgia, but now Notre Dame would have a better win than that because Notre Dame beat A&M, who just ran the table and is playing in the SEC title game, right? So any scenario you come up with, Notre Dame's going to have a better record than all but one SEC team, most likely. And if it is a team that has one loss, it's most likely a team that you'd have a common opponent with. And so it's going to be honestly, I have to admit, I was anti-12-team playoff when it first got announced. Very much anti, because I don't like the 4-team playoff. I'm old school, Trevor. I'm 46 years old. I like the bowl system. I grew up on the bowl system. My proposal was go back to the old bowl system and then pick your 4 after the bowls are played, because then we have a better sense of who's the best. I was anti-12-team playoff. Vince made a really good case that changed my mind. But as I've bought more into the 12-team playoff, I'm actually liking it more and more and more because of all we just talked about. I mean, there'd be teams that are just eliminated right now in the old system. Just, you're done. You're out. Notre Dame would be one of them because of their loss to Northern Illinois. We'd be kind of like, I don't know that it's we need a bunch of 2-loss teams to be out there for Notre Dame to be able to get in with the loss to Northern Illinois. But now you look at it and you're saying, boy, all of a sudden these random games have a lot more to say on it. And I'll be honest, it's a change I fought against at first, but I've really come around and like, dude, this is actually adding intrigue. Like, yeah, but losses don't mean as much. Actually, yeah, they kind of do, because now you're in this, well, we can't lose out because if that team does this, and if that team does this, if that team does this, we may still make the playoff, but we're going to be an 11 seed, which means in round 1, we got to travel up to South Bend, Indiana, you know, or we got to travel down to Athens, Georgia, or we got to, you know what I mean? Like, we got to head over to Eugene, Oregon for a first-round playoff game in December. Notre Dame's not going to be the only place that's going to host a playoff game where it's going to be cold, folks, right? It's going to be cold in Happy Valley. It's going to be cold out in Eugene, Oregon that time of year. You know what I mean? Like, So it actually has added some intrigue to the regular season. And I'm gladly admit I'm wrong on that one. I really thought it was going to ruin the regular season, and I was dead wrong. I actually think it's added tons of intrigue to the regular season, and we're having this conversation, right? And because if we were still in a 14 playoff, you say if Notre Dame is able to go undefeated the rest of the way, what seed would you expect them to get in the college football playoff? I don't know that they can make the college football playoff. I don't know that they can. It's going to be tough. They're going to need a lot more. They may sneak in as a 4 seed, but it was going to be tough. And now it's like, yeah, they're going to be in that case, but now who are they going to play? Where, it's going to be fun and fascinating. And I'm glad that I was wrong on that one. With everything else happening in the sport that I think hurts the sport, it's nice to see one of the changes be something that adds a little bit of excitement to it,
100%.
in my opinion.
ND Milton fan, what is the most dominant offensive line you've witnessed in college football?
I'll be honest with you, Milton. I don't know that I've paid enough attention, like break down film to say this team is the most dominant offensive line that I've seen so far. I mean, I think Ohio State's has been pretty good so far. I mean, Boise has a really good offensive line. I mean, they even ran a ball in Oregon. I think Tennessee's offensive line has been pretty good. Texas's offensive line has been pretty good. Penn State's offensive line is much improved, very much improved from what it's been in the past. I just don't know if I've watched enough for you to answer your question, Milton, Penn State, who's been the most dominant. But those are the units that just kind of off the top of my head from what I've seen on film have really stood out to me as like, boy, they're playing at a really high level. And then honestly, they're not dominant because it's system generated, but this is one of the best lines that Navy's had in a few years as well. And Army's is pretty good as well, but this is one of the better lines that Navy's had in the last few years. It's not dominant like other groups, because if you put them and you started having them run Notre Dame's offense, they're not going to be as good. But with what they do, they've been pretty good for what they do. So I don't have that strong opinion on that, Indy Milton fan. I'll just tell you, those are some teams that I've watched so far that I've been impressed by. Tell you what, A&M's offensive line's been a lot better than I thought it was going to be, at least in run blocking. Their pass blocking still has some issues, but their run blocking's been pretty good so far. They're averaging over 200 yards a game right now for a team that couldn't run the football last year. Like watching A&M and what they've done since the Notre Dame game, and this is why you got to allow what happens to influence what you've done. Notre Dame kind of shut them down. They've ran for 333, 310, 235, 236, and 134 since that Notre Dame game. Arkansas is the only team they didn't really run the ball on, but Arkansas's got a pretty salty defense. Tennessee ran for 174 on them this past weekend. Tennessee was averaging, like almost 300 yards a game coming into that game. You know what I mean? And so I feel a lot better about giving up the 146 and the 3 whatever per carry, especially since about 20 some of that was scrambles. After watching what they've done. They've been a lot better run blocking team than what they were last. I mean, last year, Trevor, they were a bad run blocking team last year, like bad. And let's just go look at the numbers. They were at 136.2 yards per game and 3.9 per carry last season. A&M was. They had 5 games of sub 100 yards. Their lowest output this season was 134 against Arkansas. Their second lowest output was 146, and their third lowest output was 235. So they've had 2 games with 5 touchdowns rushing. So much better team than they were a year ago, which adds context to, okay, now Notre Dame's performance against them in the run game was a little bit better. It wasn't great, but it was better than what I thought it was, because we realized of what this version of their offensive line is compared to what it was last year. They still have some pass pro. Like athletic defenses can still give them some problems in pass protection, but run blocking wise, they're pretty good in my opinion. So any others that stand out to you, Trevor, like any that you've seen that you're like, that offensive line is like really, really good so far?
Texas, from a pass protection standpoint, is really good. Their performance against Michigan's D-line, which I think is the best part of Michigan's football team, their performance against them showed me a lot. I know on Pro Football Focus, they're at like a 92.5% pass pro grade as an offensive line, which is really good. But to your point, I haven't paid attention enough or broken down any film around other teams as far as like game over game, like combining run and pass game. I'm not too sure, but if I had to say one, I would say Texas.
You're looking at Texas kind of like how Washington was last year.
Mm-hmm.
Like they were not a great run blocking team, Although I think this Texas team probably run blocks better. But it's more about, hey, you're dominating with what you're asking your team to do, which is to protect the quarterback, and they do a pretty darn good job of that. Yeah, I like that one. All right, let's get to I had a question real quick I wanted to ask of the chat. So Throwing Hands Irish, I wanted to ask you real quick if you could follow up on your nightmare scenario question, because it's a very intriguing thing that you've proposed, but I'm curious why you think that is a nightmare scenario. So if you could explain to me why you think that's a nightmare scenario, I'd like to bring that up later in the show and kind of discuss it. It's an ACC title game question, so it's very interesting. So I'd like to address that, but I just want to kind of see where you're coming from on that before I really address it.
John A1, if the offensive line play remains the same for the rest of the season, is Rudolph still a better offensive line coach than Jeff Quinn at Notre Dame, or is it more to it now for Rudolph?
Yeah, I'd still say he's a better offensive line coach than Jeff Quinn because he much better run blocking line than what Jeff Quinn had. Like, I would argue that Jeff Quinn's offensive lines did a better job pass protecting than Joe Rudolph's. I think that's fair to say. But run blocking, I mean, it not even close. It's not close. I mean, for all the issues we have with the job that Joe Rudolph's done, from who we're starting and pass pro has been an issue and all that. I mean, I get all that, and that's all completely fair. But for the most part, this has been a pretty darn good run blocking team. For the most part, they didn't do a great job against Louisville. They weren't great against Northern Illinois, but they were really good against A&M. They were really good against Miami of Ohio. They were really good against Purdue, and they battled against Louisville. I mean, Louisville did some things schematically that made it a problem for them, but they still made some plays in that game. And as I said, I thought Notre Dame kind of got a little conservative, and it made it harder on the offensive line because they're just A-gap, B-gap, A-gap, B-gap, A-gap, B-gap all game. But run blocking wise, and that's, to me, the way that Notre Dame's trying to play is pretty darn important, so. But I'll say this, he's a lot closer to Jeff Quinn right now than he is Harry Hiestand, and that's a problem. That's a big problem. He's going to have to adjust that. But I'm trying to be a little bit reserved with my sharp criticism of Joe Rudolph this year. And here's why, Trevor. Number one is I didn't like the hire to begin with. And when I publicly don't like a hire, I try to be a little bit more patient with my criticism the first couple of years, because I worry that sometimes it can come across or even be confirmation bias. Well, you didn't like him in the first place, so of course you're going to ignore that he's got 3 starters not playing right now. Of course you're going to ignore that they're young and they're inexperienced, and that's fair. I mean, that's a fair thing to say. And so I'm trying to be realistic enough about my own potential bias. Say, look, let me just see how the thing plays out, and be careful. Okay, I'll criticize this, but not get into the whole he's a bad hire and this is why I didn't want him in the first place and all those type of things, because I don't think that's fair. I will say the issue, however, is there are things happening now in pass pro that are not just because of you're not playing your 5 best. Not playing your 5 best means your guys are going to get beat individually more. It's just going to happen. Rocco's going to get beat more than Billy Strouth did. It's just going to happen. Pat Coogan's going to probably get beat more in pass pro than Ashton Craig did. It's just going to happen. Anthony Knapp's going to get beat more individually than Charles Jagasaw would have. Just the reality when you're not playing your 5 best. But when you can't handle line games for 5 straight weeks, that's not you don't have your 5 best on the field. That's it. You're not coaching them. These are still offensive linemen who are on scholarship at the University of Notre Dame. 2 of the guys that are now starting, who are your backups to start, are guys that came into the season with 23 career starts, and those 2 guys now are creeping up on 30 career starts. You can't handle line games. That's a coaching problem, not a you don't have your best guys problem. So I'm willing to address that. But then I'm also not going to ignore that they've had some pretty darn good run game performances, and they're better in the run game overall so far than I thought they'd be. So it's been a little bit of a mixed bag. But if I was going to put him on a scale, it's Harry Hiestand here, a big gap, Joe Rudolph, and a not very big gap for Jeff Quinn. And, because, again, you could say, well, he's Rudolph's doing a really good job recruiting. Well, so did Jeff Quinn for the most part. He had some really bad blunders and from a evaluation standpoint. But I'm going to tell you guys right now, Jeff Quinn did not luck into Joe Walt. They didn't miss 2 guys and then have to turn to Joe Walt. They loved him early. They saw his potential early. Now, do I think that they thought he was going to be a top 5 draft pick? No, but they thought he could be really good, and they went after him early. So props for that. You know what I mean? So they did some solid recruiting things during his tenure. He wasn't a great recruiter, but he was a solid recruiter and did some good things. You know, I think Joe Rudolph's a better recruiter so far than what he was, but you know, it's early yet. It's early yet. But as a coach, he's better than Jeff Quinn, but it's not by a ton. And he's not as close to what Harry Hiestand. Like Harry Hiestand's offensive line started slow early in 2022 as well. But by game 4, really the second half of game 3, the second half against Cal, that offensive line started to figure it out. And with very few exceptions, they were pretty good the rest of the year. There were other things that happened that the line gets blamed for. He couldn't run on Stanford. Well, go watch the game plan. That wasn't the offensive line not playing well. That was a stupid game plan. But they played pretty well rest of the year. This line has not made that jump. And that was with a pretty young offensive line. Trevor, you had 2 true sophomores playing at right tackle. Winning that season, Blake Fisher had 2 career games played, much less starts. You know, that's a pretty young group as well in some spots. So that's kind of where I am on that one, Trev.
I'm with you. If I were to look at it on like a number line, right, and say that Harry Hiestand's a 10 and Jeff Quinn's a 1, not saying that that's what I think of them as coaches, just if I were putting them on a number line, I would say that right now Joe Rudolph has fallen somewhere in that like 4 range, because to your point, he's a little closer to Jeff Quinn. Then obviously he's not that close to Harry Hiestan. I will say the one thing that's so tough about that is like Harry Hiestan obviously being the benchmark for like a great offensive line coach at Notre Dame is just so tough, right? Like that's kind of like, you know, where does Kalen DeBoer fall in comparison to Nick Saban? And it's like, it's tough. Now, obviously you're Notre Dame, you're O-line U for all sakes and purposes. Yeah. So like it is acceptable for that to be the standard. It's just tough after 2 seasons asking if Joe Rudolph is close to Harry Hiestan. It's like, well, no, he's not. But, you know, give it time. We'll see what happens.
When he was hired, based on what he did at Wisconsin, I said he's closer to Harry Hiestan than he is Jeff Quinn.
Gotcha.
My opinion has changed a little bit since then, and that's not a great thing.
Sure.
That's my concern. But again, totally. It's halfway through his first year, and there has been some loss. I mean, you don't justify it and excuse it, but you also don't act like it doesn't mean anything. Because if Charles Jagasaw, Ashton Craig, and Billy Schrouth are now going into their 6 starts of the season together, we're having a much different conversation about the offensive line. Because now, if one of the guards or one of the young players is struggling, guess who you're talking about maybe stepping in lineup? Anthony Knapp at guard or center, where he's more comfortable, more natural. So you can't ignore that. You know, it doesn't completely justify everything we've seen, but you have to, if you're going to be honest and fair, and I have to really make sure I'm that way because I didn't like the hire, and I don't want it to come across as like a personal thing with Jeff Quinn. You can't, Joe Rudolph, you can't ignore that. I mean, it'd be very shady of me to do that if I were to do that, but I don't think it excuses everything. You know what I mean? That's kind of where I'm at on that one. I'm going to ask this next one, Trevor, because I want to get your thoughts on that. I have an opinion on this, but I want to give you a chance to answer it first, because I'm very curious to see what you think about this. This is from John A1. This is a very interesting question. This is one I was hinting about earlier. If Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price were traded in time with Josh Adams, Tony Jones, and Dexter Williams in 2017, would there be a difference in outcome in either year, and would you do it? So would 2017 be better or worse if you traded backfields? Would 2024 be any different if you traded backfields? It's a very fascinating question. Very fascinating question. I'm going to let you answer it first.
That's an interesting question, John. I like that a lot. The one thing that I will say is it's weird, because if there was one thing that both running back rooms were really good at, it was creating big plays in the run game. I would love to see what Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price would have done behind that 2017 offensive line. I don't think the outcome would be different, if I'm being 100% honest, because the issues in 2017, very similar to the issues in 2024, is not the running backs. It's not, in my opinion, it's not. So I think that Jeremiah Love would provide a more dynamic use of the running backs out of the backfield than Josh Adams did. Josh Adams was a big play guy, not really used a lot in the pass game. I think Jeremiah Love you could use a little bit more, but again, gosh, that's tough, man. I'm not sure. I mean, different outcomes of the year, genuinely, I don't think that I would. I'll say I would do it just to watch Jeremiah Love or Jadarian Price run behind that offensive line from 2017 because I think that would be insane. But as far as outcome goes, I don't think the team has a different outcome because they finished 2017. They finished 10-3, right? They were 9-3 in the regular season, got that 10th win in the bowl game against LSU.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's a different outcome in my opinion.
Interesting. I'm glad I let you answer first because I actually disagree.
Okay.
I think there's a different outcome for sure then, and I think there's a little bit of a different outcome now. And here's what I mean by that. Love Josh Adams. Great kid, really good running back. I grade him as a 4-star. He was a one cut and go guy. He was making nobody miss with any kind of moves. He needed the hole. And if the hole was there, baby, he was going to do something special. Dexter couldn't stay healthy. He only had 30-some carries. He was very immature. He wasn't mentally the guy he was in 2018. He had a lot of growing up to do. And Tony Jones was banged up a little bit that year too. And Tony was a good back, but Tony was not. Tony was Jabron Payne, basically, of that team. You'd give them 2 home run backs, which is exactly what they had in 2017. 2 home run backs, right? Tony Jones, Dexter Williams, or Josh Adams, Dexter Williams, both home run backs. Dexter's much slower than the 2 guys they have now, right? But he was still a home run back because he played fast. You give that line these 2 kids, all the big plays that Josh Adams and Dexter had in 2017 still happen, but this group makes more plays. And you look at the Georgia game, that's the difference in outcome. They don't lose. They still lose to Miami because that game went way deeper than running backs and O-line. But there were, and I've argued this before, you go back and watch that Georgia game, there were holes to hit that were not big, but you could get 4, 5, 6 where Josh would take a -2 because Josh was he was always hunting for the home run. To your point earlier about Jeremiah Love, one of the reasons that Jeremiah is so much more improved is he's more of a pure running back this year. I'm willing to hammer it up in there and run into the back of my lineman to get 2 yards. It's because otherwise, if I wait, I'm going to get -2, because there's no hole. Let me just follow my line and get what I can get. Josh would hunt for big plays, and that would often result in him getting a lot more. Josh was a very much a boomer bust type of runner in a lot of different ways. And he essentially is Jadarian, right? Where Jadarian's that way now, but Jadarian's a number 2. I think that Jeremiah Love would have been a far more impactful back in 2017 than Josh Adams. And he also brings a lot more value in the throwing game, in my opinion. So I actually think you might beat Georgia if you had this year's backfield. Because what have we said about this group? Just get a body on a body, and these guys are going to do great things. Well, Mike McGlinchey, Quentin Nelson, Sam Mustipher, Alex Bars, and then a rotation of Tommy Kramer and Robert Hainsey did a lot of getting a body on a body for people. You know what I'm saying? And I think this running back room would actually be a lot better. I don't know that group, honestly, Josh would not be great on this year's team to the degree Jeremiah is, but Josh should still be a home run hitter on this line because there are some times where they're giving him that vertical crease and he's going to hit it and make big plays. But I just don't think he's as good, in my opinion, as the 2 backs they have at doing all the other things. Josh was a great home run hitter. He's got a 98-yard touchdown run. He's got multiple 70-yard touchdown. I mean, he was a home run hitter, man. But it's the things he did in between home runs that weren't always great, And I think these guys bring a lot more to the table in that regard. So I actually think it's a better backfield. And I think this group of backs running behind the 17 offensive line, I think you're a one-loss, maybe a one-loss team. Because I'd be curious how they would have gone into the Stanford game, even with the Miami loss, mentally knowing, hey, we still got a shot at the college football playoff. Because I think they would have, going into that game, because they'd be 9-1, still ranked real high. They'd have that win over Georgia. How do they go into that game? So where would they have been mentally going to the Miami game? I mean, there's a lot of things you look at, but I actually think it would have had an impact. And I think they would have ran the ball even better, which is kind of scary to think about.
Yeah.
Because of, you know what I mean? But like the one thing Brandon Wimbush could do back then, and that not I shouldn't say that because I'm making it seem like it's a difference between him and Riley Leonard, but the one thing that offense did in 2017 is they throw the ball down the field with Equanimous St. Brown, and you had him, you had Kevin Stefferson steps into the lineup later, you eventually Chase Claypool steps in the lineup, Chris Fink was a pretty good route runner. Like you could take some, I mean, first play of the game that season was a bomb to Equanimous St. Brown. They ran a play action, a deep corner route that went for 40 some yards. One of the big plays that opened up the Michigan State game, first drive of the game, Brandon throwing a post route over top to Equanimous St. Brown that he caught. Yeah. Had a big down the field back shoulder to Chase Claypool. That's a different set of receivers, I think. That was a pretty talented group of receivers. I would say this, if you could take Riley Leonard and the two running backs, that'd be fun to watch. That'd be real. Or change it a little bit. If you could take that 2017 offensive line and put it on this team with this defense, that would be even more fun. But that's why I wanted to let you answer that one first, because I had a feeling my take on this might be a little bit different. I
do think it would favor Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price significantly more switching than it would Josh Adams, Tony Jones.
Yes, coming to play on this team, I'll agree 100%. I mean, you'd have to kind of not be a good running back to get yards behind that line. You know what I mean? Like,
you have to be me at running back, and even then, I still feel like I could get.
I could move the chains a little bit.
I was about to say, I feel like I could get 3.5 yards of carry behind that offensive line. You give it to me 3 times, I'll get a first down, not by much. They'll have to measure it every time, but I feel like I could.
Exactly. Oh, that's good stuff. That's really good stuff. All right, let's get down here and get some more questions. You guys are doing a great job with questions so far.
Dan McKenna, do you know which 2025 quarterbacks and running backs are being pursued? And if so, do you consider them top 100 level talent?
So I don't know for sure who the 25 quarterback and running backs are. I think I have a pretty good idea. Notre Dame, for whatever reason, is being really they don't want to talk about it, right? They don't want names to get out there, partly because they're trying to flip some kids and they don't want it out there because those kids aren't necessarily looking around. They're only looking at Notre Dame, if that makes sense. And so if they decide not to flip, then I don't know that they want that to be on those kids that they decided to flip, or they talked about Notre Dame. They want to stay locked in. So they're not playing that game. So with that being said, if they are who I think they are, I don't know if I'd consider them top 100 level. I haven't graded them out yet, but I'll be happy with both pickups. Very happy with both pickups. So and I'll just kind of leave it at that. But I'm going to be honest. I don't know for sure who those guys are because Notre Dame's being really sneaky. But I think I have an idea. And if it's who I think it is, I'm going to be happy. And I actually have it narrowed down to a couple guys at both positions. And I don't want to say it because I don't want to – if I get it right, I don't want to be in trouble with them, to be honest with you, because they've asked me not to do that. And so, but that's kind of where I'm at on that. If they land who I think they're going to land on offense between now and the end of the next couple months, I think the view of this offensive class is going to change dramatically. And I think that they have a much better chance to land to have a very strong finish on defense than maybe people think. Like we know about the linebackers, but I feel a lot better about where they stand with Jalen Wiggins than I think most people I've engaged with that I've taught. I don't know what others are reporting, how other analysts think. I don't know. I don't read it. But from my conversations with people that I talk to that are Notre Dame fans, they don't think that they have a shot with Jalen Wiggins. My thing is I want to see how – look, I'll feel a lot better. I answered this from somebody today. They said, how do you feel about it? I said, look, I'll feel a lot better if he visits on November 9th. That's the plan right now. He's going to visit on November 9th for Florida State game. If he shows up that weekend, I'm going to feel really good about it. Right now, I'm cautiously optimistic, but they're a legit player there for him. I think I'd be shocked if they don't get one of Madden Faramo and Nathaniel Usu-Boateng. I think they get at least one of them. I feel really good about where things are with Jalen Cooper. And you add him with Scrap Richardson, and you already have Elijah Burris and Jerome Bettis. So you add the two kids at quarterback and running back that I think that they're going to get. I think they're also going to take another offensive lineman in this class who's a solid Midwestern kid. And I believe that there's a chance they may add another tight end. We know who they are. If they add the Tiandre Waverly kid, that's more about them choosing do they definitely want to take a second tight end or not. there's a chance for this staff to finish a lot stronger. I think that people think that they're going to finish like a lot stronger. And I think those two kids are part of that conversation. So that's my take on that.
BK's last brain cell. In your opinion, what will be the perception of Notre Dame leading into the next bye week if the O-line simply gets better at pass pro?
This is a dangerous football team, Trevor.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. Look, they're not going to be a light the world on fire pass team. If all they do is get better in pass pro, and that's the only thing they get better at, they're still going to be I don't know how deep of a run they can make, because I don't know for sure if they can throw well enough to win more than a game or two in the playoff. That's still a legitimate question. But as far as what they're going to do the rest of the way and who they're going to play in the first couple rounds, if you're a 1 or a 2, if Notre Dame simply just gets better at pass pro to where they're a good pass blocking team, not great, just good, just solid, people are going to look at this team and say, I do not want to play this. If you're the SEC or Big Ten champ, you're going to be like, please give Notre Dame the 5 or 6 seed. Please give Notre Dame the 5 or 6 seed. Please give Notre Dame the 5 or 6 seed, because you're like they're going to run the ball really well. They're going to be dynamic. Their defense is going to keep getting better, in my opinion. If they just get better in pass pro, this team for the next 7 games, and then going for then it would be the next 4 games, and then going in the playoff is going to be a very dangerous team, because their defense is very, very good. I think they have good talent at receiver. They have to play better. But if the O-line starts giving them more time, you start hitting some of those throws, maybe that ignites that group to go out and play better. But I think that would make Notre Dame a very dangerous team and a lot more fun to watch for sure. There's no doubt about that. That's my take, Trevor. Do you have that same kind of positive view, like this team could be really good if they just get better at this?
100%. From a team standpoint, it makes it to where there's not a lot of aspects that you can attack this team and they can't be successful, right? If you just take it and look at if both trenches improve, right? If offensive line and defensive line improve, we're talking about very close to a complete football team. Because right now, the recipe for stopping Notre Dame on offense is, on paper, relatively simple, but they still have really, really good athletes, which makes it not as simple as what it seems. But if they get good at pass pro, they become a balanced offense to where, sure, I mean, you might try to stop the run per se, and they have a 3-headed monster in the backfield where that will still be hard on any given Saturday. You throw pass pro into the mix, it puts defensive coordinators in a bind to where I think there is a lot of question around how you stop this offense, which is going to be very, very, very refreshing after what the first 5 weeks were with a lot of this. So couldn't agree more. It's imperative that over the next 3 weeks, they work to becoming a more balanced offense, because then they do truly become extremely dangerous.
Yep. Agree.
Irish blooded. During the Brian Kelly era, who is the one commit you felt got away that would have been the best get if Notre Dame could have kept him?
That's a good question. Just off the top of my head, I'd probably say Ronald Darby. Because in 2012 in 2014, 2012 and 2013, you'd have had Ronald Darby and Kavari Russell starting next to each other, and you'd have Cole Luke as your nickel. That would have been really good. I don't even think Brian Van Gorder. This might be a dangerous statement to make, but I don't even think Brian Van Gorder could screw that up. At least completely screw that up. You know what I mean? But the other thing about it is, man, I got to tell you, Trevor, there's a chance that they don't even move Kavari Russell to defense if they got Ronald Darby.
Yeah.
Because I think he might, and then now you're talking about in 2014 and 2015, you might have Kavari Russell as your running back slot guy in that offense. Think about that 2015 Notre Dame offense with Will Fuller and Chris Brown and Amir Carlisle and CJ Prosise and Josh Adams, and you also have Kavari as a running back or a slot receiver in that offense. That might, you know what I mean? So Darby doesn't just impact, boy, he's that one best player. I think Darby would have had an impact, could have potentially had an impact on the offense as well, because they may not have, because originally when Kavara Russell got recruited to Notre Dame, they recruited him as a running back, sort of hybrid slasher running back that could play some slot receiver. And that, who knows how that would have been. And he was committed to Notre Dame for a long time, and they just dropped the ball. Like, they just, long story, but they dropped the ball. It shouldn't have happened because Ronald wanted to come to Notre Dame, but a lot of things happened with the coach that recruited him and the head coach and different things. They just dropped the ball and allowed Florida State in there. I tried to warn them, but they didn't listen to me, and he ends up flipping to Florida State. So the other one would be, I have to. That's my defensive one. I want to say what Notre Dame had a shot to get Ronald Jones in 2015. It came down to USC and Notre Dame, and I remember talking to Ronald at the because he committed at the Under Armour game, and I remember talking to him, and he was like, I kind of thought it was going to be USC, but man, Tony Alford made that real tough. If you'd have got Ronald Jones and he'd have ran behind the 15 and the 17 offensive lines, imagine if Torian Folston goes down in 2015. And you still have Josh Adams, you've got Ronald Jones, you've got Dex, and CJ Prosise. Right. Oh boy, that's fun to think about. Or they may not have even needed to move CJ, and he could have stayed as their slot receiver, where he was like a 20 yards per catch guy the year before in 2014, could do jet sweeps and stuff. That's one where, man, could you imagine the numbers that Ronald Jones would have put up at Notre Dame if he ran behind the 15 and the 17 offensive lines? Oh my goodness. So those are the two that off the top of my head, it's both named Ronald. No, not saying that was my plan, but those are the two that just off the top of my head kind of pop. If I had sat down and looked at different classes, there'd probably be some other guys that would pop in my head. I'm like, oh, that's a good one. There's some offensive linemen. Like, what if they would have got, what was the name of the kid that went to Ohio State? Taylor Decker. What if they would have got Taylor Decker and he would have come to Notre Dame and been coached by Harry Hiestand instead of leaving to go follow Ed Warner to Ohio State? Like, what have happened there? Like, what could the line have looked like if he would have done that? You know what I mean? But I still those are still elite lines. These guys to me would have been big time needle movers. So they're off the top of my head, those are the two that have the biggest impact for me. Trevor, do you have any that pop in your head? Did you follow recruiting enough during the Brian Kelly era? Not
close enough during the Brian Kelly era. I do have a question for you though. Mm-hmm. I have my own mailbag question.
Okay, so, love it. Let's do it.
So from Tro5 mailbag. So,
well played.
Thank you. So outside of Kyron Williams, who is a guy that Notre Dame has gotten in the last 10 years that performed higher than what you initially graded him, like shocking performance?
I mean, I love that you said outside of Kyron Williams because he's the obvious. No, I think I might have had him as the lowest or second lowest offensive commit in this class. I thought he'd be a nice eventually. I thought he'd be Tony Jones. Nice backup running back, change of pace guy, smart, tough, but just not a real dynamic guy. He was way better than I thought he was going to be. Outside of him, the guy that was the best that I didn't think would be good. Oh man, I'd have to really think about that one. I know there's a couple offensive linemen that I was surprised were as good as they were. They weren't great, but they were better than I thought they would be. I have to think about that one. No quarterbacks, no running backs outside of Kyron. Receiver. I mean, who'd have thought? I don't even think you can count this one. Like, who'd have thought Chris Fink was going to come in and be what he was as a walk-on? Yeah. I mean, I actually liked Chris Fink out of high school. He was a really good high school football player. I thought he'd be kind of like a guy that comes in and plays well and things like that. Somebody said Howard Cross. That's not a bad one. I was very high on Cam Hart. Somebody said Cam Hart in the chat. I was very high on Cam Hart coming out as a receiver, but I also thought he could play defense as well. So that one's was not a surprise for me. Howard Cross. I had Howard Cross he's pretty much been what I thought he should have been. Man, that's a good question. I have to think about that one, Trevor. Trying to think of some defense. I remember there was a defensive lineman that played. Let me go look at some tackle, an indie tackle for lost numbers. There was a defensive lineman somewhat recently that I remember playing a decent amount for them that I was like, I did not think that guy was ever going to play for Notre Dame. Let me look at that one. Let's see here. I don't. I could be wrong. I thought there was a defensive lineman edge player that was a lot better than I thought. I liked Adi Taguba Ogundiji. I thought he was pretty good. I had Jeremiah Wusu-Koromoa with the high upside grade. I have to go back and think about that one, man. I want to say like I just nailed them all, but that's not true. Let's see. Niles Morgan, Andrew Trembetti. No. Oh, that's one. Jonathan Bonner. That's one. That wasn't the one that was on my head, but John, I didn't think. No, I actually liked Kurt Hinish coming out. I thought Kurt would be kind of what he was. A good, solid rotation guy, try hard guy. I did not think Jonathan Bonner was going to play much for Notre Dame. I did not. I did not. I thought he'd be I'm like, I don't see that guy ever playing a meaningful down for Notre Dame. I didn't. And he was a pretty solid player. Started for him on the 18 team that went undefeated in the regular season. And or was he started on the 17 team? 17 team, I think, was his last year at Notre Dame. But he started on that 17 team he was on the 18 team. I was wrong. He started on the 18 team as well. He wasn't like an impact player, but he was a good, steady player that I never thought would be that guy. I don't know if he'd be the one, but just kind of looking through the numbers, those are some guys that just kind of pop out to me that were James. I wasn't super high on James Onwualu coming out as a receiver. I thought he'd probably be a better defensive player. He ended up moving over to the defensive side of the ball. I wasn't super high on Matthias Farley coming out. He was better than I thought he was going to be. That's another one that I would look at. I mean, I like Julian Love coming out. I thought he was. I mean, you say like, okay, I had him as a 4-star. I didn't see him being a consensus All-American. You know what I mean? So I mean, but it's not like I had him as a low. Like Kyron, I had ranked low, and he became a really good player. Julian, I had ranked relatively high, and he just was even better than I thought he was going to be. So I mean, those are just off the top of my head. Those are some that kind of pop out. I'd have to go back and look over the classes over the years, Trevor, to get a better sense of that. But once you remove the Kyron one, that was the most glaring of those guys. But those are a couple. I have to look at the offensive line classes because I feel like there was an offensive lineman they got who ended up being better than I thought he was going to be. But I just can't, off the top of my head, remember who that was. Because like I liked Stanley coming out. I liked Quentin. I liked McGlinchey. I liked Eichenberg. I liked Kramer. I liked Aaron Banks. I liked Zeke Carell. I liked Alt. I liked Fisher. I'd have to go back and look at that one. So, and to answer your question, yes, Kyron, I don't know if Kyron still has me blocked. I would assume so. I don't know why he would unblock me. Like I'm not in his orbit anymore. So, but yeah. So that's a good one, Trevor. Good one. Trevor throwing in the little TT row 5 mailbag question. Yeah. I dig it.
Thank you. Mohammed Abdi, Brian, which is the best Notre Dame defense since 2010? And do you think 2024 has a chance to be the best excluding the 2012 defense?
Well, there's been a couple bests. I think the 2012 was the best statistically. I think the 2018 defense was probably better, just as far as its ability to play against the best teams in the country, because it didn't have as many flaws. The 2018 team had the same issue that the 2012 team had, that you were an injury away at a lot of positions from being screwed. Fortunately for Notre Dame, like if Kavari Russell or Bennett Jackson would have got hurt in 2012, they were effed. They were so screwed. If Lewis Nix got hurt and missed a long period of time, they would have not been the same team. 18 had a little bit of that, as we saw in the Clemson game. I actually think 18 was probably the best defense that Notre Dame had. It wasn't the best statistically, but it was still pretty good statistically. I mean, that was still a pretty good defense statistically. I thought the 12 team was more dominant in the trenches against the run. I thought that 18 team was much better against the pass and much better pass rushers. I think they complement each other well. In my opinion, I think 18 is probably my pick to be the best. Last year's defense was really good. They're in the conversation with that 2012 defense. I believe that this defense has a chance to be the best defense they've had so far at Notre Dame in that time. It's not there yet, and I'm less optimistic about that coming true because of the injuries we've seen. You know, you've lost your top 2 starting Vipers. That's tough. You know, and yeah, you get Josh Burnham back, but Josh is a different type of player than Boubacar. Josh is really good all-around player potential. He's not the dynamic difference maker potential. I mean, Boubacar was on pace with the snaps he was getting. He could have been creeping up on 10 sacks by the end of the year, the way he was playing. I mean, if not passing 10. There's nobody that does that on their defensive line unless Bryce Young, the light goes on for him maybe a little bit earlier than we think. That's a concern. But, I mean, I think Benjamin Morrison's going to keep getting better. I think the young players are going to keep getting better. I think the linebacking core is going to keep getting better. You're going to get Gabriel Rubio back. But here's the big thing. Can the offense do its part to take some of that pressure off the defense, which makes them play even better? That's a big thing for me. So I think that you don't even have to exclude 2012. I mean, right now, if the defense finishes the way that it has played so far, Trevor, it'll be the second best defense since 2012, even if they just do exactly what they've done the first 5 games. I mean, they're only giving up 12.6 points per game, and they've already played the best team on their schedule and held them to 13. The second best team on their schedule scored 24, and they had a 24-yard touchdown drive and a 9-yard touchdown drive because of what the offense did. So, and still only got 24. So I actually think that this team is better suited to kind of have some of the success against the more modern offenses. That defense would have struggled against modern offenses, but you could argue this defense might struggle going back then against some of the teams the way they ran the football. You know, maybe this team's not as good against Stanford back in 2012 because Stanford would have run right at them. That's a legitimate argument to make. But right now, 2012 and 2018 are the best. I would say that 2018 was probably the most talented, most dynamic. 2012 got the best results. And I think this defense has a chance to be better than 18 in some of those other areas, but on par with 2012 from a yards and production standpoint. The question is going to be, can they become more disruptive defensively up front? That's going to be the big key, which you and I talked about, Trevor, and you wrote about in your defensive article that we put up. I think, did I put it up yesterday? Did I forget to publish that? I'm going to have to go back and look at that. I think I might have forgot to publish that yesterday. I wanted to publish it yesterday, Trevor, and I think I might have forgot. I'm going to have to go look that up and see if I forgot to publish that. That's my bad if I did. Yes, I did forget to publish that. So I will fix that problem right now.
No worries. So, well, when it is up, it is covered in the article.
Yes, it is. So we'll get that fixed. So anyway, good stuff there. You guys are going to like it. It's good. It's good stuff. Whoopsie. All right. So that's a good one. Let's move on so I don't look like it's big of an idiot moving forward. So here we go.
Coach Bent 574. Of the remaining Notre Dame opponents, based on performance thus far, which is the best offense and defense they will face the rest of the season?
Well, I mean, if we're talking about what they've done so far, Trevor, I mean, is there anyone other than like Navy that I can go with? I mean, if we're talking what they've done so far, Navy's scoring 43.6 points per game. You know, I mean, and it's not like they've done it against the Sisters of the Poor, right? I mean, they scored 56 against Memphis. You know, they're coming off of a 34-7 win over Air Force. Air Force is not a typical Air Force team, but this is still a good football team. I mean, I'd have to go with Navy so far. I mean, they rank 11. They rank higher than all the Notre Dame opponents in scoring. So if you look at Georgia Tech ranks 51st in scoring at 31.5. Army ranks actually 20th. USC ranks 58th in scoring offense. Virginia ranks 68th in scoring offense. And who am I missing? Florida State. Okay, they're 128th in scoring offense. It's like, I mean, statistically, total offense, Navy ranks. That's passing offense. They're going to rank very low on that one, just to give you guys a heads up. Navy ranks 21st in total offense. Army ranks 27th. Georgia Tech ranks 42nd. Virginia ranks 44th. USC ranks 36th. I mean, with what they've done so far, I'd go Navy. Now, are they the most talented offense? No, that's USC and Georgia Tech right now. I mean, they're the most dynamic athletes. They got future NFL players. It's good.
Sure.
But as far as the best offense they face, it's Army, it's Navy. And I mean, they're scoring 2 touchdowns more than anyone else on their schedule, not named Army. You know, so I kind of got to go that route, Trevor. It's Navy.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%.
I mean, I don't know what case you can make unless you're just going to argue talent. But you know, Florida State's got more talent than Navy. Does that mean they got a better offense than? I mean, are you guys more worried about? And I don't know if anyone's making this case, but that's the only case you can make. Is anybody worried about Florida State more than they're worried about Navy? Most people aren't, because Florida State sucks. They got talent, but they suck. We're talking about best in production. It's Navy so far.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I don't know if it'll play itself out, but the question was based on performance thus far. Thus far, I think it's Navy. I don't know that my answer will be the same by the time we get done with week 12, but that's not what the question said. It's the best offense so far. Now, defense, who's the best defense they place move forward? Do you have an immediate thought on that, Trevor? Like, because they don't play a lot of great defenses down the stretch. I mean, you know, USC's defense is improved, but it's not exactly lighting the world on fire. Although, according to the Big Ten broadcast on Saturday, they have a really good defense, and Minnesota has a high-flying offense, which I thought was just patently absurd. So if you look at their opponents, Georgia Tech ranks 36th in scoring defense. Navy ranks 42nd in scoring defense. Army ranks 5th in scoring defense. Virginia ranks 48th in scoring defense. Florida State ranks 81st in scoring defense, and USC ranks 28th in scoring defense. So statistically, from a scoring standpoint, it's Army and USC are the 2 best on the docket. I'm curious what the Fermo Efficiency Index says about defensive ratings. So let's check that one out, Trevor, and see what Brian has on that one. I'm not speaking in, just so people understand, I'm not speaking in third person. It's Brian Fermo is the guy that runs the Fermo Efficiency Index. I know how that kind of sounded at first. So see, Stanford has 70th in efficiency according to the FEI. I'm just going to go in order of opponents. Georgia Tech ranks 92nd in defense relative to, this takes into efficiency, context of who you've played and all that. Then they've got Navy, who ranks 63rd. Then they play Florida State, who ranks 50th. Then they play Navy's after Virginia's after Florida State, right? And they're 38th. And then you've got Army, who is 76th, and then USC, who's 30th. So according to the FEI, it looks like USC has the best defense, and they are also second best in scoring behind only Army. So it would look like USC has the best. And they've been scrappy. I mean, look, USC hasn't lost 2 games because of their defense. I mean, well, their defense did give up that final drive, but their offense had a lot of chances to put that game away. And, you know, they didn't play great. What USC's defensive problem is finishing. They haven't finished well. They've played 3 really good quarters in each game and then don't finish well. But that says a lot about the type of defenses that Notre Dame's offenses face, which is why they got to get right. You know,
100%.
They got to get that one right, man.
100%.
Got to get that one right. So good question so far. Here, let's get down to some more.
Christopher Crosby, LSU and Ole Miss is always an exciting game. Of these 2 teams, who is better in the position to take a second loss and still make the playoffs?
Well, I'd say LSU, because if LSU loses, they've only got 1 conference loss. So LSU still has a chance to go win the SEC. And so I would say that. Now, my counter to that, Trevor, would be, but I think LSU has a tougher schedule remaining than Ole Miss does, I believe. So Ole Miss, let's say Ole Miss loses this game, they get Oklahoma at home, Georgia at home, Mississippi State at home, at Arkansas, at Florida. So it's not an easy schedule, but it's a more manageable schedule than what I think LSU has, which is at Arkansas, at A&M, at Florida, home against Bama, home against Oklahoma. So I think LSU's is a slightly tougher schedule. So you could counter that. I think if Ole Miss loses this game, they could maybe win out and then have a great win over Georgia. But the problem is they're not going to be in the SEC. They have a much slimmer chance of being in the SEC title game because both of their losses will be in conference.
Yeah.
Where if LSU runs the table with a second loss, they are probably playing for the SEC title because their first loss was against USC out of conference. And then LSU would have beaten Bama, so they would have knocked Bama out. They would have beaten Texas A&M, which then gets interesting because they would both have one conference loss, but LSU would have won the head-to-head over A&M. So I think that would put them in the conference championship game. They would have knocked Ole Miss out by giving Ole Miss their second conference loss. And they would also knock Arkansas out by giving Arkansas their second conference loss because Arkansas's got 2 losses right now, but one of their losses was out of conference to Oklahoma State. So LSU is a team that can still lose a conference game, run the table, and play for the SEC title because their first loss was out of conference. So I'd say between those two, put it to like this. If LSU loses this weekend, they still control their own destiny in the SEC.
Yeah.
If Ole Miss loses this weekend, they need help.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I should have just led with that, and I could have maybe answered that one a lot quicker. But that wouldn't be me. Now, if you were to ask me, Trevor, which team is more suited to then take a loss and run the table, I'd say probably Ole Miss.
Ole Miss, yeah.
But, they would need a lot of help. They would need a lot of help, though. They don't control their own destiny. And that's kind of where – and you could say if LSU loses this game, it shows that they're not as good and they're going to take them. That's a different conversation. I'm looking at it differently. I'm looking at it more from the standpoint of which potential resume gives that team a best chance of still being a playoff team. So sure. I hope that answered that question. So
John A1 asks, should Mike Mickens be considered for the Broyles Award? Do you believe he's Notre Dame's top and most important assistant, as I do?
If we're talking non-coordinator, yes. I mean, I still think coordinators are very important. I mean, they're still the most important, but of just pure position coach, it's not even close.
Yeah.
And that's with all due respect to Dylan McCullough, who I don't think it's arguable who the best offensive coach is from just a pure position coach standpoint, right? Not coordinator, but just position coach. Mike Mickens, I think, is the best defensive backs coach in college football. I do. I think he is. So I honestly, I don't know. I gotta look at the Broyles Award. Normally it goes to coordinators, but I don't think it has to or always does. So let me just look at this real quick. So of course they don't have, let me see if I can pull this up real quick. Trevor, and see past winners, but I think normally they give it to coordinator. So it's Phil Parker last year, Garrett Riley, Josh Gaddis, Steve Sarkisian at Bama, Joe Brady. Well, Joe Brady technically wasn't a coordinator. Mike Loxley, Tony Elliott, Brent Venables, coordinator, Lincoln Riley, Tom Herman, Pat Narduzzi, Bob Diaco, John Chavis, Gus Malzahn, Kirby, Kevin Wilson, Jim Heacock. I'm going back. These are all coordinators.
I pulled up a list.
Best assistant coach is what it says, though.
Yeah, I pulled up the list for the 2023 nominees. Most of them are coordinators, but Gennaro Guilford at BYU, he was the cornerbacks coach. Outside of that, James Finley was Colorado State's tight ends coach. But most of them, if they are a position coach, they are also the offensive coordinator,
I think that's kind of fair because coordinators ultimately are responsible for putting it all together. But if there was going to be, and here's the thing though, Mike Mickens is also Notre Dame's pass game coordinator.
Yeah.
And they have an elite pass defense. So I personally believe he should absolutely be. He's one of the best assistant coaches in college football.
100%.
You said most important, and that's the most important part is where I would say I'm not sure I could give it to him then because I think you'd have to go with maybe Al Golden or even Mike Denbrock in that case because Mike Denbrock getting the offense figured out is the most important part of this football team in the next 7 weeks, 7 games.
Yes.
But as far as best, I don't know that – and who's the best coach? It's hard for me to say anybody but Mike Mickens.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like he got lucky and happened to have Benjamin Morrison and Cam Hart at the right time. Okay, cool. But he also coached a secondary where they made the playoff with Clarence Lewis and Nick McLeod as their starters. You know, you lose Cam Hart, and Christian Gray looks like he's every bit as good, if not better. Benjamin Morris, or Christian Gray goes down. Leonard Moore steps in. He balls out. I mean, it hasn't mattered who he puts in. They play well, and yeah, I mean, I think he's elite. I mean, he's an elite coach. There's no doubt.
Couldn't agree more. Aiden Benami, do you believe Denbrock when he says they're ready to open it up a bit?
Yeah, I think he's always wanted to. It's just, is everything going in the right direction? I think some of that's coach speak in regard to you've got to give guys something to write about, and it's certainly a goal. I think he's saying it more so that's our objective. But open it up a bit doesn't mean, folks, that they're going to come out on Saturday and throw, 8-9 routes in the first half of the game. You know what I mean? Like, we're not going to see Riley Leonard dropping back and throwing post routes every other play. It just means we're just going to be more aggressive. Do I think that's what he wants? I do think that's what he wants. Does he probably feel better about that now coming out of the bye? Probably. Good couple weeks of practice and all that.
Yeah.
Well, we got to see it on Saturday.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean, that's part of it, but no, I think this offense is going to keep getting better. And, just like we talk about the context of the O-line, we have to remember this team started the season off with 9 players in the starting lineup that had freshman or sophomore eligibility. And the 2 guys that didn't were transfers who weren't here in the spring. There's room for this team to get better. Now, does that mean that they will? No, it doesn't. It doesn't guarantee that they will get better.
Right.
It just means we shouldn't assume that they are what they are, which you normally do when you've got a bunch of returners coming back and they just didn't get any better. This is Chris Mitchell still finding his home at Notre Dame. Bo Collins is still kind of finding his place at Notre Dame. Jaden Harrison, they're still trying to figure. Riley Leonard's, it's a lot of different things going together. Doesn't mean that they will get better, but there's room for them to get better. That's why I feel like this Notre Dame team has a chance to get a lot better in the second half compared to maybe last year where it was just a bunch of veterans. And you're like, I don't know if they're going to get any better. This is just who this team is. Where this team is like, you can expect the performance of players not just being locked in, but their technical aspects to improve, their mental aspects to improve, and all those type of things because they're still young and they're developing, or they're new and they're in the system. I remember when I asked Marcus Freeman during the offseason, we had a sit down with him, and I said, you got a really weird roster on defense. You've got all these 5th and 6th year seniors, Howard Cross, Riley Mills, Xavier Watts, all these guys. And then you've got a bunch of freshmen and sophomores. And there's outside of like Benjamin Morrison, Jaden Mickey, there's like nothing in between, right? Jalen Sneed, maybe Don, Don, and there's a couple guys, but you get the point. Like the depth chart is going to be dominated by these 2. And he says, I'm not actually, and it's very prophetic. He was spot on. He said, I'm actually not as worried about those young guys. I'm more worried about the transfers. So Drake Bowen's been in this defense 2 years. That was his point. He's like, Drake took the coaching. He was in the system last year. He had JD he's like, he's been in the system for 2 years. Guys like RJ Oben, Jordan Clark, Rod Hurd, they're brand new to the system, and this is not an easy system to learn, which is why I think when I watch Rod Hurd play well against Louisville, I start thinking back to that comment that Marcus Freeman made. RJ Oben didn't play great against Louisville by any stretch, but it was the most effort I've seen from him in a game so far. It makes me think, okay, maybe the light's starting to go on for those. Well, how can it go on for a 6th-year senior? Because of what Marcus Freeman told me back in May, which is this is the guys I'm worried about because, yeah, these guys are young. They don't have a lot of game experience, but they know the defense. That's exactly what we're seeing. So who made a quicker transition into the Notre Dame system? Is it Jordan Clark or Rod Hurd? What's been Jordan Clark? Well, they're both transfers. So what's the difference? Jordan Clark, spring. Rod Hurd, no spring. Right? I mean, there you go. So, yeah, it's coming on a little bit slower and I wasn't in love with what I saw from Rod Hurd, Jordan Clark in the spring. He's okay. He's all right. But now you look at him and you're like, okay, that spring, those issues in the spring, that he's worked them out and he knows the system. So that was something I found fascinating, that he's turned out to be spot on in his assessment. We're like, I think the young players are going to be fine. And guess what? They have been. They're really freaking good. You know what I mean? Bryce Young has more time in this defense than Rod Hurd does. I mean, CJ Carr had more practice reps in this offense than Riley Leonard did coming into the season.
Yeah.
Right. KK Smith and Micah Gilbert and Cam Williams had more practice reps in this offense than Bo Collins did. And Jaden Harrison, because Jaden Harrison got hurt like a week and a half into fall camp. So those are the things. Jaden Greathouse has been in the system a lot longer than sixth-year senior Chris Mitchell has. So he's turned out to be prophetic, and that just keeps sitting in the back of my mind whenever I'm feeling like this team is just who they are. They're not going to get any better. That comment sits in the back of my mind, and when I watched what those two veteran defensive players did in the Louisville game, where that was by far their best performance of the season. It screamed in my head like Marcus Freeman making that statement this summer of, I'm not worried about Drake Bowen and Christian Gray and Adon Schuler. I'm worried about Rod Hurd and Jordan Clark and RJ Oben. And you're like, dude, he's nailed it. He absolutely nailed it. And if he is correct and those guys end up getting better and better and better and better, that's how this defense is going to keep getting better and better and better. And the same is true for the offense.
Yep.
Trevor, because it is a young group, and young guys tend to have more in-season improvement than seniors do.
For those reasons, that's why I've been extremely bullish about Notre Dame improving as a team, because Notre Dame hasn't even now they are close to it, but Notre Dame hasn't even hit the halfway point of their season yet. They played 5 games. So now on the flip side of that coin, we as a fan base have to start seeing it, right? It's not going to be good enough anymore to say, well, they still haven't came into their own. It's like, okay, well, it's week 13. So ideally they start that at some point, right? But if a team hasn't figured out who they are by week 13, that's just kind of who they are. Yeah, that's to say.
I don't know why that guy got that was so funny. That was the dryness in which you laid down that sarcasm, Trevor, was very well spot on. So please continue. I had to interrupt you because I love that. That was awesome.
Thank you. I appreciate it. But for the people out there that say that this is just who Mike Denbrock is going to be in South Bend, this is what Riley Leonard is going to be in South Bend. Mike Denbrock, no. Riley Leonard, maybe. I think that there is room to say maybe, but if you go back and you take a sample size of what he's done since the Purdue game, Riley Leonard has shown that, one, he is still very dynamic with his legs. He has shown that he can hit those easy layups. He has shown that he can push the ball down the field. Now it's just getting into that conversation of what we've talked about before. Can you put it all together? And once we've seen him do it once, now it's, okay, can you build on that? Can you do it 2 weeks in a row? Can you do it 3 weeks in a row? And then the offense can start gelling. But by no point, by any means, is this is just how good potentially Notre Dame's offense could be, because it's not. Now, flip side, we have to see it. We have to go out and see Notre Dame be the offense that we think that they can be, which is, full disclosure, not going to be as high as what we thought it was going to be to start the season. It just won't be, for a multitude of reasons. They're down 3 starters on the offensive line, indefinitely,
and
2
only
for
one
the
of
rest
them
the
might
season.
come. Right, exactly. Sorry, I should have just shut up and let you finish. You nailed it.
No, you're good. And then once you compound that with all of the things that Brian just mentioned, that 2 of your starting wide receivers right now transferred in. Your starting quarterback has less reps overall with this team's offense than what the 4th string true freshman did, right? So there's a lot of different factors that go into this. So we'll see what happens, but I do mean it. By no means do I think that this offense has reached its ceiling. Now, over this next 3-game stretch, like I've been very bullish about all week, we're going to get an idea, because they're going up against less than ideal pass defense. Stanford is not a good pass defense. They don't have the athletes to compete with Notre Dame. So if they go out and they still can't do it, then I think you're going to start getting a better indication of what this offense is going to be down the road. But by no means have they met it yet. And I'm very confident in saying that.
When we get to the second bye, if we're still talking about the same issues, the O-line, pass pro, the pass game, then it's, guys, that's who they are.
Yep.
Right? We're now through 8 games. They're not – they may have some good performances in the last 4 games because they're playing some defenses a couple times, or at least inferior defenses, but this is who they are. Postseason, if they're coming out of Navy game and the offense hasn't found its stride at all, hasn't made any improvements, that's just who they are. They may run the table. They can still go 11-1 with this offense, but it's you're not going to be more than a round deep into the playoff. And that may even happen depending on who you get in the first round. You may get one of those 2-loss SEC teams that's really good, but got beat up by a hard schedule, they may knock you off in the first round. I mean, you're going to struggle to really go far if the offense does get better. But to your point, Trevor, if we're going into the next bye week and we're still talking about the same exact issues on offense, that's going to tell us that's just who Notre Dame is. And they may make like a mild improvement in a couple things, but they're still going to just be who they are. It's a great point. Very, very good point. All right, let's get down to, I want to get to some people that we haven't got to yet. Let's go to Riker Ferg.
Riker Ferg asks, with the ever-changing conference realignment, could we get to a point where conferences kick teams out of conferences?
I don't know the rules on this, but I do believe that every team signs a sort of an agreement to be part of a conference when they go in and their TV contract is up. I would imagine that there's some sort of legal option to remove a team from your conference. I think there has to be. I don't know what that is. I don't know if that's happened before. Some of you might remember a time when that happened. I don't remember off the top of my head a Power 5 team, or even back when it was Power 7, Power 8, whatever, when you had more leagues. I don't remember a team getting booted from a conference. I remember like UMass has gotten kicked out of a couple conferences for sucking, but I don't remember any of the big-time conferences. But I'm sure that could. But like when people bring that up, the problem is people tend to focus on the teams that aren't good and ignore like Vanderbilt. Oh, kick Vanderbilt. Okay, Vanderbilt's really good at every other sport in the SEC for the most part. Even their basketball teams had some good years. Women's basketball has been really good, but they're great in baseball. I mean, so there's advantage. And number two, they're in Nashville, Tennessee. I mean, they're in a big city. They're not, yeah, you got to pay them amount, but you're going to replace them with somebody. You're going to get to 20 teams anyway. You're not going to drop Vanderbilt and be at 19. You're going to drop Vanderbilt, bring in somebody else. So somebody's getting that money. The only way you would ever see conference alignment where teams get kicked out, in my opinion, would most likely be teams are doing things very egregious, you know what I mean? Or, doing something wrong, like bad. Or B, it's like, I mean, I don't even know if there's a B, actually. I'm just going to stop there. Doing something egregious because that's what my B was. Or teams decide we want to get smaller. We don't want to be at 20 teams anymore. We want to be down to 16, or we want to be down to 14 or 12. That's the only way. Because it wouldn't make sense to kick Vanderbilt out, because why would you want to kick Vanderbilt out and add, like, let's say Notre Dame? Because you're like, well, hold on a second. You're still going to have to pay Notre Dame what you paid Vanderbilt, maybe more in certain things. And now you just added a better program. So now it's even tougher for your teams in your league to compete. Like, okay, let's keep this bad. Let's keep, I don't know. I mean, pick a team. Let's keep, what Kansas used to be. Why would we want to get rid of Kansas? They're good in other sports, and they're a guaranteed win for all our football teams. And we're not going to go from the Big 12 to the Big 11 just because we don't like Kansas, and we're going to spread that money around more. It doesn't work like that. You're going to still have more teams, same amount of teams. You're going to split that revenue up from somebody. But that would be the only two scenarios, and I just don't know how that would work and how that would play. I think the only way that changes really, Trevor, is if they just get rid of the NCAA and current contracts and just they create something new, and that's when you could maybe see some movement. But in the current alignment, I don't know what else could be different or what they would do differently.
Sure. Bobby S., do you think we get one, both, or neither of Mizell or Cooper? Same question with Faremo and Owusu Boateng. Is the Waverly holdup admissions related?
No, I don't believe it's admissions related. I think it's more about Notre Dame just trying to build a relationship with a young man, right? They haven't been on him that long, and really deciding what direction they want to go with their offense. And so I don't think they're necessarily pushing for him to commit today. I think there's still now there may be some admissions things like, hey, this kid's new to our process and we still have to go through the admissions process to get him in. But I don't know that it's admissions related based on he has bad grades and can't get in. Because if that was true, they probably wouldn't recruit him, because there's no time left to fix the problem. You're in the middle of your first semester of your senior season. So I think it's just more about just the process. Do I think they get one, both, or neither of Isaiah Mizell and Jalen Cooper? I think they get one for now. Isaiah Mizell likes Notre Dame a lot. He also likes some other schools, and as of right now, he plans on taking other visits. So that's where they are there. Could he end up getting both? Yeah, they could get both. I think there's a greater shot they get both than they get neither. And that's true for both of these things. I don't think there's any scenario where they get neither of those receivers or neither of those DBs, of those linebackers. So better chance they get both. And I think the more likely scenario right now is that they get one of each and both, as opposed to what are the best odds of happening. This weekend's going to be huge for Jalen Cooper. I think they need to really impress him. There's a reason that Jadon Blair is coming back and some of these commits are coming back, is because they know we want this kid, and the Notre Dame staff likes this kid a ton. So he is a big time priority for them right now. As far as getting to a fifth receiver in the class, I'm not one of those get five no matter what people. I don't believe in taking guys just because you feel you have a numbers need. I don't think that's how you properly build a roster. If you don't think a guy can play for you at a high level, then go get a portal guy for a year, let him compete, and then try to find a better high school kid next year. Because when you bring in a high school kid, you kind of get to the point where you could potentially be stuck with him for 4 years, because you can't kick a kid off the team who's doing everything right and doesn't have an injury history. Or at least it gets a lot harder to do that. So if you find the right guy, like, if they decided to take Isaiah Mizell and Jalen Cooper, would I be okay with that? Absolutely. I'd be fine with that. What I'm saying is if you choose not to get or if you miss on one of those guys, you don't go get a fifth just to get a fifth, unless he's a guy that is of equal or better player than what you already have. That's where I'm at. Because otherwise, with the portal, you go get a portal kid for a year, even if it's a depth guy, and then get back at it next year and try to, because you don't want to lock in a scholarship to a solid player for 4 years that is solid. Right. It always happens. You recruit a guy that's just solid, he ends up being great, or a guy that's great you think it's great, ends up being solid. But if you believe, we just think he's an okay player, that's not you don't add that as your fifth guy. That's a guy you get first or second, and then you just hang on to him like Jerome Bettis Jr. But if they get to 5, like, they're going to get to 5 new receivers. Like, that's a given. The question is whether it's going to be 4 high school kids and 1 transfer, 3 high school kids and 2 transfers, or 5 high school kids. And that's going to be determined by the quality of who that fifth guy could be. And I also think that in the back of their minds, there's still a desire to maybe recruit a couple guys that used to be on the board that aren't anymore, and maybe they're your fifth. And if you miss, then you could go to the portal. If you were to ask me if they both wanted to commit to tomorrow, let's say after the visit, Jalen Cooper and Isaiah Mizell both call up and say, "Coach, I want to come to Notre Dame," I'd take them both. I would. Isaiah Mizell is not nearly as polished as Jalen Cooper, but he's super fast. Jalen Cooper is a good athlete, but he's a great football player. And I'd take them both. I think they complement each other incredibly well, in my opinion. So I personally would take them both. I just don't know that if Notre Dame will. I've already answered the linebacker question. I think right now they're in a better position with Madden Faremo than Nathaniel Usu-Boateng, but I think they're in a very good position with both. I'll be shocked if they don't get at least one of them. There's a much greater chance that they get both than they get neither at this point in time. So just got to be patient, let the process play out. So I hope I answered that question for you.
DMND13. Who do you root for in the Army-Navy game every year? For the record, the correct answer is Army.
I mean, Dan, you and your dad has offered me to give me a guided tour of West Point. How do I not say Army with that? I mean, to you, when you're the one answering the question, I got to say Army. Like, you have to. You have to. So I don't know how you go anywhere else with that one, man. So, no, I mean, honestly, it depends on if that game means anything for Notre Dame or not. And I'm back and forth. I've always been partial to Army, but I'm also from a Navy town, from Virginia Beach. And, there's a lot of different reasons why. Sometimes I like Navy. Sometimes Navy winning is better for Notre Dame's resume, which is, it's, when you're begging for Navy to win a game because it's better for Notre Dame's resume, you don't have a very good resume, in most years. But it just depends. It depends. But when you're answering the question, my friend, it's Army. If your dad asks me that question, it's Army. I have to go there because I love you guys. So appreciate the question. How about you, Trevor? I mean, do you have one team that you consistently root for in that one?
Mine's probably Navy. I think Notre Dame plays them on a more regular basis. So I guess looking at it through a Notre Dame lens, I would say Navy. But I guess since DMND13 asked a question, I'll fall in line. I'll follow suit. Army, let's do it.
Oh, goodness gracious. All right, let's get down here. Here's Trevor, you and I were talking about this one beforehand, so let's bring this one up.
Yeah. Irish blooded. Better music, Sir Elton or Billy Joel?
I mean, they're both great musicians, right? I mean, that's true. I think they're both very talented musicians. My personal preference between those two is Billy Joel. I just like his music more. I would say that Elton John might have more classics than Billy Joel, but just overall, I get more entertained by Billy Joel's music. I still love the story you told. You said your parents went to a concert where they both share that story, because that sounds right. But my first of all, my choice, Billy Joel.
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
Billy Joel as well. So my dad, he still has the T-shirt, and it's really cool. So my parents went to a concert when I was young, and it was Billy Joel and Elton John, and just on the stage were just these two grand pianos. And they would go out and duet each other's songs. And my dad said it was the greatest concert that he's ever been to. So I would have loved to be a part of it. I'm fairly confident. I was like 4 at the time, so wouldn't have appreciated it anyways if I went. But yeah, that would have been an awesome concert to go see. But to answer the question, Irish blooded, I'm a Billy Joel guy.
Good answer, Trevor. Good answer. All right, let's get down to this, because I want to address this one.
John A1, has the wide receiver coaching improved? Are they fundamentally better this year compared to last?
Yes, it is improved. No, it is not improved as much as I think we all hoped it would, but it is improved. There's technical things that are better. They compete better for the ball. Not as good as they can, but they were terrible at competing for the football last year. I don't know that they draw a couple of the pass interference last year, because they wouldn't have competed for the ball. They're blocking extremely well. That's part coaching, not just technically, but demanding it from them. They don't, they're not where they need to be. They're not where they should be. And I need Mike Brown to do a better job. There's things that they're not doing a good enough job, winning at the line, doing different things. But overall, I think they are better coached than they've been. They still got a long ways to go. Maybe I thought Mike Brown would be able to do more early on, and honestly, I think he should have. But you can still see the improvement. It's not enormous amounts of improvement, but it's definitely an improvement.
Yep, 100%.
Trevor, I'm gonna ask this next question, and I really want to get your answer on this one, and I have to real quick. So
yeah.
I'm very, very curious to see what this one would be. This is always an interesting debate. It's normally I have this debate with Tim O'Malley. We always debate Will Fuller, Golden Tate versus Michael Floyd, because he thinks Golden Tate was better. I said if I could have one of the two, I'd take Michael Floyd. I've given my reasons. He's got his reasons and all that. It's fun. It's a fun discussion. But this is one from Connor O'Doherty. Who would you rather put into the current Notre Dame offense, Golden Tate or Will Fuller?
I'm going to go with Golden Tate on this one. So all week, really for the first part of the season as well, I've been talking a lot about Notre Dame needs to do things with their receivers to get them open after the catch. And in my personal opinion, I think that Golden Tate, historically for Notre Dame, is one of the best wide receivers that they've ever had after the catch. He's a dynamic playmaker. Dude was built like a running back, had the speed of a wide receiver. So it was awesome to watch him play. I remember, I mean, I'm sure you guys in the chat remember this game, but the 2009 Washington game, Golden Tate broke free on multiple long plays, a lot after the catch. I think 2 of them were just over routes that were 11 yards down the field. And he broke one for a touchdown and then stepped out at like the 3-yard line on another one at the start of the third quarter. So with this current offense, I'm going to go Golden Tate. I like Will Fuller. Now, we haven't seen what Chris Mitchell was, as advertised when he came in, but it was said that he was a 4-3 guy. I think if Chris Mitchell does open up, I think he will resemble something of a Will Fuller-esque type of player, right? So I just think based on the pass protection, you wouldn't be able to utilize Will Fuller as much as you could have. So I'm going to take Golden Tate for this one. So, Brian, what about you? What do you think?
I think you nailed it. I think Golden Tate was a better all-around receiver Will Fuller gave better effort. Golden Tate's a much better fit in this offense. I don't know that. I think Riley Leonard's a better quarterback than most. I think he's been better than some people give him credit for, especially after the second game. He was not good the second game of the year, but a guy that runs a bunch of goes and posts and deep balls, I don't know that Riley Leonard's that's his wheelhouse.
Yeah,
and I think Golden Tate's a guy that would like running RPOs with Will Fuller with this running back and quarterback room. Like, dude, you know what I mean? He's like Golden was built like a running back. He ran for, over 2,000 yards in his high school career. I mean, he was a 1,000-yard running back for a couple of years in high school. So I would go Golden Tate. Yep. Now, last year's offense, I'd have gone Will Fuller.
Same.
With Sam Hartman just dropping back, throwing go balls and post routes outside, I'd have gone with Will Fuller. This year's offense, I'd have go Golden Tate because it's about the fit. And my answer, if you include Michael Floyd, is always Michael Floyd.
If it's any year in any offense, I think
exactly.
I'm probably taking Michael Floyd.
Exactly. That's my take. That's my take. Yeah.
Josh Buffalo, the motivational business banker. Which past quarterback is best suited to win a national title with this year's team? Everett Golson, Brady Quinn, or Jack Cohn? Just interested in your thoughts. My pick is Everett.
I mean, it's Brady Quinn because Brady Quinn had all the other intangibles. And as much as if we're just talking talent, Everett Golson's probably the more dynamic guy. Great thrower, accurate, can run. But quarterback is a lot about intangibles. Mm-hmm. And Brady Quinn had intangibles at quarterback that Notre Dame hasn't seen in the quarterback since number 9 was running the triple option and winning a national championship, right? I mean, since Tony Rice.
Right. Tony
Rice had phenomenal intangibles, and Brady Quinn was next on that list of intangibles. And I want that leadership. I want that toughness. The accountability that comes with having Brady Quinn as your quarterback. I love Everett Golson as a talent. Love him. But give me Brady Quinn on that one. And I love Jack Cohn, but Jack Cohn does not belong in a conversation with Everett. I mean, you won't find a bigger Jack Cohn defender for what he did for Notre Dame in 2021 and the character he showed doing it. And I just love Jack Cohn to death. But when you're comparing Everett Golson, Brady Quinn, I would say, okay, let's maybe talk Jimmy Clausen.
Yeah.
Although I wouldn't take Jimmy on this team because of the pass pro issues, but let's talk maybe Ian Book, because his mobility, he can escape, Kaiser, maybe Malik, there's some guys like that I would look at. Jarius Jackson, would be a guy, not Jack Cohn, not on this offense, not for his lack of mobility that he had. I mean, there's a lot of different reasons, but he's just not on the same level as Brady Quinn and Everett Golson. And I love Jack Cohn. I think the world of Jack Cohn and what he did that season. And I thought he got a little screwed by the Notre Dame coaches. They were always looking to replace him with Tyler Buckner. And that's not a great place to be in. And every time they ready to bench him, Jack would come off and rally you and, big Jack Cohn fan.
Yep.
Big Jack Cohn fan.
I agree. I'm going Brady Quinn as well.
Yep.
Archer 452, ESPN's FPI playoff predictor has Indiana with the 9th best chance of making the college football playoff, one spot ahead of Notre Dame. How much do you think Notre Dame would beat IU by on a neutral field?
Well, first of all, Indiana should be ahead of Notre Dame when it comes to percentages of making the playoff because they control their own destiny 100%. Notre Dame is likely in if they win out. I mean, I can't think of a scenario right now where they're not in if they don't win out, but there's at least a chance you could leave them out if they don't win out. You literally cannot keep Indiana from the playoff if they win the rest of their games. They are 100% in control of their own destiny. So they should be ranked ahead of them. How much would, I'd probably take Notre Dame by a touchdown or 10 points. I mean, the problem that Indiana would have in the game against Notre Dame is they're a team that's built on being really good on offense. And I don't know that the things that they're doing would be able to put up enough points against Notre Dame to stop Notre Dame. And their defense is solid, but it's not great. I think that Notre Dame would be able to run the ball on them a little bit. I think that Notre Dame would be able to make some plays in the pass game. It'd be a competitive game based on what we've seen from both teams so far. My opinion might change on that in the next couple weeks if Notre Dame starts playing like they're capable of. But I think it would be similar to the Louisville game, honestly. I like what I see from Indiana right now. I think it'd be similar to the Louisville game. Indiana's similar to Louisville offensively. I think Louisville's a tad better defensively. So that'd be my takeaway, Trevor. I think that it would be 7 to 10 point game because again, Notre Dame's played 2 top 15 teams, one top 15 now, one top 15 when they played. They beat one by 7, beat one by 10. I think Indiana right now is a legit top 15 team right now. I mean, the way that they're playing, so it'd be similar to how they beat those other 2 top 10, 15 teams. So 7 to 10 points.
I think it would be a close game. Ask me again after they play Nebraska, just because I need
and Notre Dame play Stanford
100% because there's just so much left still of both teams to kind of see. Because for Notre Dame, to your point, well, they beat Texas A&M at Texas A&M at night, and we just saw what they did to Missouri at home during the day. Notre Dame beat Louisville at home, which is a good ranked football team, and then on the flip side with IU. Yes, on one hand, they haven't played anybody, but they have handled every single team that they've played. So I don't know yet what IU has done, and I know we talked about this on the buy so hold, but what IU has done already this season has surpassed most of, if not all, expectations outside of Signetti's, right? So it's going to take some time for me to see what that would be. I don't, so. I'm gonna
and I even wonder if Signetti showed up like we're gonna be 6-0 when we start. You know what I mean? Like you say that, but in your mind, did you really think that? You know what I mean? Like that's it's been impressive, dude. I'm not taking anything away from
it. Absolutely
so far. But the Notre Dame defense is a different animal than what they faced so far.
The Notre Dame defense is nothing compared to the Maryland Northwestern defense. I mean, come on.
Yep. He's done a really, really good job there.
Yes, he has.
All right, let's get to this one. We can answer a couple kind of quick. Here's one.
Connor Fitch, is Ryan Walters the worst Power 4 coach?
I mean, I'm trying to think of somebody that's worse, and I don't know that I can think of anybody worse right now than Purdue. I mean, can you think of a Power 5 team that's worse than Purdue right now? I mean, like, so here's an example. Like Kansas has the same record as Purdue. Kansas has actually scored more points this year than their opponents. They've lost close games. They lost by 6 to Illinois. They lost by 3 to UNLV. They lost by 4 to West Virginia. They lost by 4 to Arizona State. They lost by 11 to TCU. So in their 5 losses, they've been outscored by a combined 9, 13, 24, 28 points in their 5 losses. That's like the best loss Purdue would have had in a game so far. You know, I mean, their losses have been by 59, 17, 18, 46. And their other losses were to Oregon State, Nebraska, and Wisconsin. It's a couple decent teams, but nobody lighting the world on fire. I mean, I honestly can't think of a team that's worse. Like UCLA is really bad. Really bad, but they're competitive. Like, and I don't mean competitive in like, hey, they might win. I mean, they're competitive in that they battle you for 4 quarters. I mean, they had no chance of beating Oregon. You never watched that game and felt like, hey, I think they're going to, but you're like, these kids are trying hard. They're playing hard. They're giving effort, and then Oregon pulls away late. Same thing with Penn State. Like they played Penn State tough for a while, and then they just don't have the horses, and they're not coached incredibly well from a schematic standpoint, but those kids play hard and they battle, they compete. Purdue just gets destroyed. I mean, they just get annihilated. It's bad. They're way worse than I thought they were going to be this year. Way worse. They're worse than they were last year. Like, you don't see coaches regress a whole lot this early in his tenure. So I don't want to say definitely he's the worst, but dude, it's hard for me to make a case that who would be worse. I mean, you give Jeff Lebby a little bit of a break at Mississippi State. They're not very good, but he's in his first year, and even then, 7-point loss to Arizona State, 24-point loss to Louisville is not good. Not as bad as some of the ones that, they've had 17-point loss to Florida, 22-point loss to Texas. Those are nothing compared to some of the losses that Purdue's taken in year 2.
I agree. I think it's got to be Ryan Walters. Deshaun Foster's the head coach for UCLA, and it's still just way too early.
Right, year
with
one.
him.
Same with
Like,
Jeff Lebby at Mississippi State. Those teams are
yeah.
bad, but they're year one.
Yeah.
But you watch them play, Trevor, like they were getting Mississippi State, even like you look at them at because we talked about Deshaun Foster, like, no, he's not doing a great job so far. But you know what? I'll give his teams credit because they, like I said, they compete.
Mhm.
They don't quit. They play hard. Purdue's checked out of a couple games already. Like their players just checked out. Like Notre Dame's backups were moving the ball and shutting down Purdue starters because they left their starters in almost the whole game. They just quit.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, Jeff Lebby, you mentioned in game one, but like they were down like 35-3 against Toledo. It was terrible. But you know what? They finished well in that game. They scored the last couple points. I mean, they didn't quit. You know what I mean? It's a bad loss, but they didn't quit. It's hard for me not to say Ryan Walters.
Yeah.
I really don't know who else I could look to at this point in time.
I agree.
So somebody said Sonny Dykes. Sonny Dykes, guys, y'all do remember that Sonny Dykes has won at Cal to a degree, won at SMU, and had TCU in the college football playoff, beat Michigan a couple years ago. Sonny Dykes has more college football playoff wins in TCU than Notre Dame does. So, okay, yeah, he's not doing a great job at TCU, but seriously, the guy that had them in the national championship game 2 years ago is the worst Power 4 coach? Are we being serious?
Yeah.
Like, that's a bad take. That's a bad take. And TCU's underachieving, but I believe they have a 500 record, correct? Isn't TCU 3-3?
Yeah. Yep.
So they beat Kansas at Kansas, beat Stanford at Stanford, beat Long Island, who stinks, and then they lost by a point to TCU UCF. So, yeah, they're not very good, but come on, guys. They would smack Purdue right now. Smack Purdue. And their head coach was in the national championship game 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I can't go with you all on that one.
Corey Flynn, insert peak Deshaun Kaiser or peak Jimmy Clausen into quarterback this year. How far do we go this year? And just for fun, peak Steve Berline. Before our time a bit, I know. Also, Trev's had his fire. Appreciate you.
I'd have to go Deshaun Kaiser just because he's more mobile.
Yeah.
And that's the only reason I would ever pick Deshaun Kaiser over Jimmy Clausen is mobility.
Mm-hmm.
Neither of them are great leaders, but Deshaun was a bad leader, in my opinion. But he's more mobile. You can run your rezone stuff. You can run your RPO stuff. You can protect your running backs with his running game a little bit. And he could throw the ball downfield. That's one thing Deshaun was good at. Jimmy would struggle behind this offensive line. It would look a lot like when he was at Notre Dame, but he wouldn't have Golden Tate and Michael Floyd and Kyle Rudolph to throw to. You know, and you, Trevor, you may not know this, but I am much higher on Jimmy Clausen than a lot of Notre Dame fans were. And I think he gets a bad rap because he was considered, you know, not a, you know, good leader or whatever. And that's fine. I wasn't covering the team I don't know, but I'm saying, like, I watched that kid play on one foot and battle his butt off and make some throws. And you're like, his offensive line sucked. The defense was trash. And he still went out there and competed every game. You put him on some better Notre Dame teams, and we have a much different view of Jimmy Clausen. Plus, he got so much hype coming into Notre Dame that he was never going to live up to expectations.
Sure.
I mean, never. And but Jimmy Clausen was a really good quarterback at Notre Dame from a production standpoint. And you say, well, he didn't win. Imagine what their records would have been if Jimmy Clausen wasn't at Notre Dame.
Oh, gosh. I mean, I love Jimmy Clausen. He was the first quarterback that I saw at Notre Dame when I started, like, watching Notre Dame, like how I did. You know, I came in Brady Quinn's junior year, and that's when I really started watching it. But Jimmy Clausen was the first one that I had seen from, like, freshman to junior year and got to see what development looked like. I love Jimmy from a production standpoint. Yeah.
Agree. Here's one that might spark a little bit of controversy. We'll see how the answer goes.
Scotty G, top 5 ranked Notre Dame running backs in the last 10 years. So that takes us back to 2014?
2015. Yeah. So it starts with that CJ Prosise year, right?
So can I just give you 5, or do you want them in order from 1 to 5?
Well, let's do the 5 first. Let's establish the 5, and then we can go order. So let's just go in order from 15 on. I believe you have CJ Prosise. Even though he's a one-year wonder, he was a 1,000-yard back.
Yep.
Right? You'd have Josh Adams.
Yep.
You'd have Kyron Williams for sure, Audric Estime for sure.
Yeah.
Then the fifth comes down to who are you taking? Are you taking Dexter Williams for his 1 year? Are you taking so he'd be 18. You taking Tony Jones, Logan Diggs. I mean, I'd probably go with Dexter Williams would probably be my fifth.
Probably
in that conversation. Now I'm leaving out the current kids because they're not in that conversation until we see them finish a year.
Yep.
So, and in that case, we could go back to 2014, but even then it doesn't change my five, because Torian Folson would have been in this conversation if he doesn't get hurt, but he did get hurt. So that'd be my five. My order, I mean, again, if we're going to talk order, what is it based on? Is it based on who's the most talented, who's the most productive, who had the most consistency over a period of time? To me, I think those are all the things that factor into me. Yes, one big year matters, but I also look at career production. I look at consistency. I look at just overall impact. And if I were to base it on that, people are not going to like this. I'd go Audric Estime number 1. I'd go Kyron number 2. I'd go Josh Adams number 3. I'd go CJ Prosise number 4. And I'd go Dexter Williams number 5. I mean, the reality is there's only one guy in this list that didn't rush for 1,000 yards, and that's Dexter. And yeah, he was great in 18, and he had some other years, but he also got suspended for 4 games, which is on him. He couldn't stay healthy in the 2 previous years, couldn't stay focused, wasn't mature. I mean, he cost himself from being higher on this list. But that's how I'd rank it. And I know some people at Kyron number 1, and I understand that. And, but look, as runners, Audric rushed for more yards. Audric rushed for more touchdowns. Audric had over a whole yard more yards per carry. The counter to that is Kyron did a lot more in the pass game. That's very true. If I'm building a team, I'm taking Audric as my number 1. Kyron is my number 2. That's how I would do it. If you're going to argue for Kyron, I'm not going to dismiss you because the pass game argument is a good one. Josh Adams, it's ironic. Josh Adams actually had, I believe, the most production of all, by far the most production of all of them. And so I'm being a little bit not as high on him. I mean, he had over 3,100, almost 3,200 yards. But a couple things. Number 1, he played a lot more as a freshman because of injury. Mm-hmm. He would not have had nearly the production he had if not for injury. It's not his fault. That's not Audric's fault and not Kyron's fault, but that factors in. I look at it like this. This is how I came down to it. Because if we're just looking at numbers, Josh is number 1. More rushing yards, more total yards, everything than the other backs, right? But here's what it comes down to for me. Those other guys were better pure runners. They had more touchdowns. And Josh benefited by playing behind 2 of the greatest offensive lines at Notre Dame in the last 30, 40, 50 years. I mean, the 15 and the 17 offensive lines were insanely good. If you'd have put Audric behind those lines, Kyron behind those lines, they're even better than they were. I don't think Josh has the same level of production if you put him on the 21, the 22, or the 23 offensive lines. I don't. I just don't. I think same thing with Dexter. Dexter was good, but Dexter ran behind some great offensive lines. Even the 18 offensive line was pretty good. Does he have the same performance that Jeremiah Love is having this year, for example? Would he have done what Audric did last year behind that line? No way in heck. No way in heck Josh Adams runs for over 1,300 yards behind last year's offensive line. No way. No way. Kyron would have been a 1,000-yard guy last year. Audric would have been a 1,000-yard guy last year. I think Logan Diggs would have been a 1,000-yard guy last year if he stayed healthy. CJ Prosise would have been 12, 13, 1,400 total yards because he would have done more of the backfield as a passer. That's where I'm at. That's my 5. So Audric, Kyron, Josh, CJ. And the only reason CJ is 4th is because he only played 1 year in this at running back. If CJ would have played, done what he did for multiple years, he would be way up this list. But he played running back for 1 year. He was very good, and he didn't even finish the season, right? So, that's why CJ's down. But, if CJ would have played multiple more years at running back, then we'd be having a little bit. And he only was in this era, this 10-year space for 1 year. The rest of his career would have been beforehand. So, that's my 5, Trev. What say you?
Mine is a little different, but the same people. So where we agree, I also have Dexter Williams as my 5th, just because with him, I almost look at it as an incomplete, right? Like it's a lot of speculation has to be had with Dexter Williams, I think more than most, because he showed flashes in 2017. In 2018, he played for 8 games because he was suspended for the first 4. So that one's tough. My first one, my order goes Kyron, then Audric. Where my hot take is, honestly, and this is just kind of my feelings about it, I then go CJ, Josh Adams, and Dexter Williams. So I have CJ.
You have CJ 3rd?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
State your case. Not going to disagree with you. I just want you to elaborate on why you would have CJ ahead of Josh.
I think that CJ Prosise was a more dynamic running back than Josh Adams, because I think he could do more. I think CJ you could use more out of the pass game because, 1, he was a converted wide receiver. And 2, I think that CJ Prosise had slightly better vision than Josh Adams, because like we alluded to before, Josh Adams was, Josh Adams, you put him in that 2017 offensive line, and when the hole was there, it was routinely, he was an explosive guy. But the way that I've always thought about Josh Adams, and he was awesome to watch. Like I don't want to.
We're arguing the degrees of being
greatness,
excellent, right? So it's not like dogging on somebody, but when you're ranking like greatest this or best that, it's like you got to find something to separate, and it's not hate or disrespectful or whatever. If you thought negatively of him, he wouldn't be in your top 5.
Totally.
I just make sure. Yeah, you don't have to. Yeah, people get that. People get that. Can I make one counter to that?
Yeah.
I don't think Josh Adams had a vision problem. I think Josh was a super tall, high-cut guy that lacked the quickness and elusiveness to hit holes where CJ was tall and long cut as well, but CJ was smooth. Like he could plant and make a back cut. I don't think Josh was really capable of that because he had big feet, he was tall, and he was and when I mean tall, it wasn't him and CJ were similar in height. The difference was CJ was not nearly as like his leg. Josh was way more leg. You know what I mean? Like
Josh
really high
really
legs and
lanky.
Yes.
Yeah.
And really big feet. And so I think that made him a little bit clunkier. So I don't know that it was vision per se. I don't think he was physically capable of making those cuts more so than he didn't have vision. Because I think he actually had, like, if you look at the touchdown running against USC that went for 80, he's running this way. He sees Alex Bars take this right arm and throw the guy, and he immediately cuts right behind it for an 80-yard touchdown. That's vision. He didn't have the ability to quickly plant, jump cut the way that Jadarian, like Josh Adams has no chance to make the 70-yard touchdown run against Purdue. Not that he couldn't see it. He physically couldn't have made that defensive lineman miss the way that Jadarian could. That's the only thing I would push. I'm not arguing with the overall point, because whether it's vision or you literally physically couldn't, the end result's still the same, to your point.
Sure.
It's just, I think that's more of what my argument would be. And I want to say something too, for people saying, well, Audric was more versatile. All right, cool. If I'm building, we're talking about building, who's my top back, then cool. Audric's my top back and Kyron's my change of pace third down back. But Audric's still my first and second down running back. Because Kyron's a better pass, he's way better pass catcher. But my number one job for running back is running the football. And if I have to sacrifice catches for a guy that's going to go 6.2 yards per carry compared to 5.1 yards per carry, and let's be honest about something too, Audric never ran behind a line as good as the 2020 offensive line. Ever. Not even close. And still was over a full yard. And Kyron was only 5.2 yards per carry that year behind the 2020 O-line. So that would be my counter to that. But I'll take any of those guys. They're all really good. Not on this team. I mean, I'm good with who they have now, but like if I'm starting a Notre Dame team and I can't have current players, I'll take any of those guys.
Sure.
Somebody said if Will Fuller played running back, how would he rank among the top running backs you are naming? He wouldn't be. Never. In it. He would not last. He would not survive at all in that scenario.
No, not in it.
All right, let's get to some more here. Let's go to Robert Bishop.
Robert Bishop asks, Where has Brennan Vernon disappeared to? I thought we would have seen more of him with the injuries to the defensive line, but I can't remember seeing him out there.
Okay, a couple things. They have not had injuries at defensive tackle once the season started. Gabriel Rubio got hurt very early on. The guys that replaced Gabriel are a senior and a junior. Brennan is a redshirt sophomore that's still redshirt freshman that's still going through a position change from end to tackle. He has not disappeared anywhere. He is still improving. You're talking about him. I mean, there's people that think Jason Onye should be starting ahead of Riley Mills. Well, that's who you'd have to replace to get Brennan Vernon on the field. So there has been no injuries at 3 technique, which is where you would need injuries to get him into the game. He's not a nose tackle, so Gabriel Rubio's injury doesn't impact his playing time. And all the other injuries are at end, and he doesn't play end. I think he should play end. I think he should be a big end. I think they should have him be around 265 and keep him 270, keep him at that weight, and have him playing big end. They see it differently. We disagree on that. But there have not been any injuries at the position he plays. Because you can't just say generally, well, there's been injuries on the defensive line. Well, there's 4 different positions that's like saying, like, you know, well, there's been a lot of injuries at safety, so why haven't we seen more of Carson Hobbs? Well, he doesn't play safety. He plays corner. You know what I mean? Like, it's very different. And it's like, okay, you're not going to move Riley Mills out the Viper because you've had injuries and start Jason Onye because he's not a Viper. He can't play Viper. Same thing with Brennan. Brennan's not going to go out and replace the injured players, which have all been at Viper, basically. That's not the position he plays. So there have been no injuries at the position that he's played that are going to get him on the field any faster, in my opinion. All right.
John A1. Based on talent and ability right now, who is Notre Dame's most explosive wide receiver? Are they being used effectively, but the O-line issues don't allow us to see it?
I mean, most explosive receiver so far has probably been Jaden Harrison from what we've seen in games.
Yeah.
I mean, just getting downfield, beating guys down the field. Are they being used effectively? Not as well as I would like them to, but part of that also is that they're not playing well outside of, I mean, Bo Collins is being used effectively. You know, I don't know that they're using Chris Mitchell effectively, but I don't know that Chris Mitchell has played in a way where I would necessarily argue that he should be playing. You should be doing more to purposely get him the football. There's been a combination of things, but most explosive receiver so far, I would have to say, has been Jaden Harrison so far. Yeah, I mean, not everything is the fault of the O-line. Sometimes you got to get open, but O-line is a big part of it. Absolutely. Sure.
Aiden Benami. Would you rather have Dabo, Josh H., or Mario Cristobal right now?
Would you rather be Dabo?
B. Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, right now, I'd probably go Josh Heupel. If I had to be one of those 3. I mean, Mario's doing some nice things at Miami, but I wouldn't want to be at Miami. I mean, you don't even have your own stadium. You know, did you watch that Friday night game against Virginia Tech? Did you see their fan base at the beginning of that game?
It was sad.
Ridiculous.
Yeah.
Tennessee plays on a Friday night. That place is packed still.
Yeah.
You know, same with Clemson. You know, you have real fans, not like, you know, front runners that are only support you when you're good. I mean, you know, what years was Derek Dooley at Tennessee? What years was he there? What was his last year at Tennessee? Let's see here, 2012. I bet you if you went back and looked at those years for Tennessee, that they still had 90, 100,000 people at all their games, you know, even back then. So, you know, I just, I wouldn't want to be at Miami. Now, is he doing some good things with them? Yeah, sure. He's doing some really good things with them. They're recruiting well. They're having some decent NIL support, although their top NIL guys, you know, facing some trouble right now. You know, Dabo is just, I mean, he's doing some good things, but I don't know that there's an upward trend on him. He's kind of a downward trend. Josh Heupel, I think, is doing some really good things. His program's ascending. They're recruiting well. They got NIL money that, you know, he's doing some, I mean, if of those 3, I'd probably rather be Josh Heupel. The one benefit that Mario and Dabo has is they're playing in a league that's less competitive at the top, in my opinion, than the SEC. So that would be a benefit, but I kind of like being challenged. So if you're asking me where I'd rather be, I'd I'd go Tennessee. I'd say Heupel, Dabo, Mario. If I could be any of them right now, program trajectory wise, that would be the order that I would want to see and be part of.
Yeah, I mean, my thing with Dabo Swinney is I think what he's doing right now is just he's the same that he was in 2018, which was great in 2018, but the landscape of college football has changed since then. So I think that's his issue, is just you gotta, at some point you have to evolve with the game. And that's why he personally, I think, is staying like this, but because college football is changing, it is causing Dabo to trend trajectory wise down.
Yeah. At the very best, he's here.
Yeah.
The very best. I think you're correct, Trevor, that he's trending down, but you can't argue they're going back up right now. Now, that could change. Runs the table. They go 12-1, win the ACC, win a playoff game or two. Then we're like, okay, cool. Because if he wins a playoff game, he's in the semifinals.
Sure.
Because they'd be the ACC champ, and he'd get a first round bye. So that would make me say, okay, they're ascending again. But until we see that, because they've only really played one good team all year, and they got beat by 31 by that team.
Yeah.
That's my issue with having them be ahead of Notre Dame. Well, Notre Dame's got a worse loss. Okay, fine. They have a way worse loss, but they've literally beaten 2 ranked teams, and the best win Clemson has had this year, I believe, is what? Like North Carolina? They're NC State, I mean. That's literally the best record of a team that they've played so far this season is NC State. Because let's look at the 4 teams that they've beaten so far. They beat Appalachian State, who's 2-3, and lost to South Alabama by 34, and just lost at Marshall by 15 in the game. They gave up 52 points. Their wins are over East Tennessee State and a 2-point win over an East Carolina team that's just not very good. They beat NC State, who's 3-3, and just lost at home to Wake Forest, and lost by 41 to Tennessee. They beat a 2-3 Stanford team, right? That's not a great win for them. And then they beat Florida State, who's currently 1-5. And they beat Florida State less convincingly than what SMU did the week before, and about the same level as what Boston College did. So, right now Clemson's got a lot to prove. But if they run the table, they will have proven something to me. They will have beaten Louisville. Right? I mean, they will have beaten Virginia Tech on the road, Pitt on the road, South Carolina, and they would have beaten Miami or whoever they play in the ACC title game. So then I'll feel like, okay, they're back. But right now, Clemson's just beating bad teams, and not always in an impressive manner. They should have beat Florida State by the same score they beat Stanford by, 100%. Honestly, and they didn't. So, I'd still rather be there than Clemson. I absolutely would. Here's a good one.
Irish English. Rank the following teams in order of confidence that they'll win: Texas, USC, Kansas State, Ole Miss, and Oregon. Is that like win this weekend?
Yeah. Let's take it that way.
Okay.
Because I don't broadly, any given game, I could mean that, but let's just go this weekend.
All right.
In order of confidence of those 5 teams, I would say I have the most confidence that Texas will win. This weekend.
Mm-hmm.
I have the second most confidence that Kansas State will win at Colorado. I have the third most confidence that Ole Miss will beat LSU. I have the fourth most confidence that USC will beat Penn State. And I have the fifth most confidence that Oregon will beat Ohio State. I might flip those last 2.
I have the same that you have, but I have the last 2.
You would flip the last 2?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one. It's a good one. All right. Let's see here. This is an interesting one.
Corey Flynn. Hi, guys. Going back to the beginning of the Holtz era, what would be your top 3 Notre Dame defenses? I assume 2012 or Barry Alvarez would be in there, or have we had our 3 best since Brian Van Gorder left?
If we're going back to the beginning of the Lou Holtz era, I don't even know that 2012 is in that conversation. The 1988 team had a great defense. The 1989 team might have even been better. Notre Dame gave up 11.2 points per game in 1988, and they did that while playing 4 teams that finished the year in the top 3 teams, that finished the year in the top 5. That's pretty good. Michigan. Actually, hold on a second. They played 4 teams that finished the year in the top 5. Trevor, they beat Michigan, who finished in the top 5, 19-17. They beat Miami, who finished number 2. They beat USC did not finish in the top 5. They finished in the top 10. They beat them 27-10. They were ranked 2nd when they played last Saturday of September. And then they beat West Virginia 34-21. West Virginia got a garbage score late in the game. West Virginia was averaging over 40 points a game coming into that game. That was a very explosive West Virginia team. They had scored 62, 45, 55, 31 points at a ranked Pitt team, 22 points at Virginia Tech, 30, 59, 51, 51, 35, 31 in a win over number 14 Syracuse before they played Notre Dame. Notre Dame held them to 21. And they got the last score. It was like 34-13, and West Virginia scored late in the game, I believe, is how that went. So that was an elite defense. The next year they finished 14-1, they finished 12-1 and gave up 14.1 points per game. They held number 1 Colorado to 6 points in the bowl game. They played 7 teams that year that finished the year ranked in the top 20. And that includes Virginia, that great Virginia team that had Sean Moore and Herman Moore and Terry Kirby at running back. They held them to 13 points. Like, that was a dominant defense with like great All-Americans and NFL players all around. So yeah, that was a pretty darn good team. I mean, they played 3 weeks in a row. They played 17-9-7. They won 41-27. I believe Air Force got a late score. They beat USC 28-24 in a game where they turned the ball. Notre Dame turned the ball over like 5 times and still held number 9 USC to 24 points. Then they beat number 7 Pitt in late October 45-7. And then, as I said, they completely shut down the Colorado offense that was really good. Colorado that year finished averaging 37.7 points per game. That includes with Notre Dame holding them to 6. In the last game, like, they scored 27 at Nebraska, 45 at Washington, 38 against the top 10 Illinois team, 59 on K-State, 41 on Oklahoma State. Notre Dame held them to 6. Their lowest scoring game of the season up to that point in time was 6 points against 20 points against against Oklahoma. So that 88 and 89, they were elite defenses. They weren't as good. Like, their 93 defense was really talented, but they weren't dominant. Like, once Barry Alvarez left, their defenses were their success had more to do with they had crazy talent, more so than they were coached really well. Like, I didn't think Rick Minner was a great defensive coordinator, but they had Bryant Young, Jeff Burris, Bobby Taylor, Demetrius DeBose, Jim Flanagan, Brian Ham. They just had great talent. Sean Wooden. Tom Carter in 1992. They were just incredibly talented, but they underachieved, I always thought, on defense. And the BC game is a perfect example. BC just shredded that defense. They had no business shredding that defense. But I was never overly impressed with Rick Minner as a coach, if I'm being completely honest with you. So, going back and looking at some of those Notre Dame teams, I actually thought Bob Davie had a couple really good defenses back then as well, but he could just never kind of get them going. But I'd go 88 and 89, and that's not just nostalgia, honestly. That's also looking at it from the standpoint of, like, those are dominant defenses. But I think 2012 maybe would be third on that group, if maybe third. But 88 and 89 to me were better than anything we've seen at Notre Dame since then. And it was a great coordinator in Barry Alvarez, along with what was an incredibly gifted team. A lot of people have pointed to 2002. I thought 2002 was a pretty darn good defense, but I don't know if they were an elite defense. And we kind of found that out when they played USC at the end of the year. They didn't really play anybody that I thought was all that good. Michigan was okay that year, but Michigan scored less than 30 points a game that year. They gave up 23 to Michigan. They held Florida State to 24 points. That team was ranked 11th that year, but Florida State finished the year 9-5. Only scored 30.6 points per game. They got exposed, I thought, a little bit late in the year by USC and then NC State in the bowl game, where they were a pretty good defense, but not an elite defense. They just were slow. They just didn't have the overall. They had some guys that were really athletic, but overall team speed was not great. So that was a fun team to watch, but I don't know that it was a great defense, like an all-time great defense. Like I'd take the 2012 defense over the 2002 defense. I wish I could take the 2012 front seven with the 2002 secondary, like Glenn Earl, Jerome Sapp, Shane Walton, Vontez Duff. If I could put that secondary on the 2012 defense, I'd feel a lot better about that. So that's where I'm at. But I know, Trevor, you weren't even alive for most of that. Right?
I was about to say I'm not going to be too good of a help here for going back to the Holtz era, because I was in 1988. I was -9 years old.
Yeah.
So, sorry.
Now you get past those top three. Now we're throwing the 18 defense in there. We're throwing last year's defense in there.
Yeah.
We're throwing the 12 defense in there. So like the only three defenses that I would put in the same level as what we've seen in recent years would be 88, 89, and 2002. There were some teams under Holtz, like 93 had like, put it to you like this. If you could take Mike Elko, Clark Lee, or Marcus Freeman, or Al Golden, transplant them in their current forms back to 1993, that would have been a super good defense. I just was never a big Rick Minner fan. And same with Gary Darnell. I didn't think Gary Darnell was a very good defensive coordinator either. So they had trouble replacing Barry Alvarez when he left. And a lot of times Lou would take over calling plays on defense. This is what I grew up watching, Trevor. There were games when Lou Holtz was calling the offense and the defense for Notre Dame. They don't make head coaches like they used to, brother. They don't make head coaches like they used to, man.
Sounds
they don't
like
do
it.
that. They don't think about that. Imagine what current coach outside of maybe Nick Saban, who's now retired, do you think could call plays on both sides of the ball?
Both? None.
For a team that's a top 10 team?
None.
No, there aren't any. It's a different animal, bro. Lou was different. Lou was different, dude.
Jeez.
There's no doubt. All right, let's get to some more, Trevor. We got a couple here that we'll get to here before we run. I want to just go through. This one was a good one that was brought up earlier from Throwing Hands. So I wanted to get a couple of those. He had a couple ones that I thought were good, and there's a couple others I want to get to before we get going.
Sounds good. Throwing Hands Irish. Nightmare scenario. Miami loses at Georgia Tech, and Louisville and an 8-4 Georgia Tech gets into the ACC championship and beats an 11-1 Clemson and gets an automatic bid.
So I was curious, like, okay, is that nightmare for college football or nightmare for Notre Dame? And then he followed up and he said, I was just saying it would be extremely chaotic. You have two teams outside of the top 12 taking playoff spots, so the 11 and 12 ranked teams would get left out. Probably wouldn't affect us. It would eliminate any chance of a 10-2 Notre Dame team getting in.
Yep.
Any chance. Like, done. Like, completely done. The other thing to factor in, too, is it's not a given in your scenario, Throwing Hands. What would make it even more chaotic is it's not a given that the Big 12 champ is going to be ranked in the top 10 either. So you could have three teams get automatic bids that rank outside the top 12. I mean, think about that. So it would absolutely, like, something like this happening would get incredibly chaotic. Some 3 or 4 loss team getting into the college football playoff would be absolutely nuts, and would but here's the thing, it's always going to happen. There's always going to be, unless you go to like 32 teams, there's always going to be some team that like gets left out that should have got in. That's part of football. But man, if you look at Georgia Tech, and if that were to happen, that would be fascinating. Now, I don't know that it's possible that Georgia Tech could even be in at 8-4, because if they lose to Notre Dame, that'd make them 3 losses. And if they lose to one more game, they would have 3 conference losses. I don't know how Clemson, like between Clemson, Miami, Pitt, I don't see those teams losing all of them. Like, well, 2 of those 3 losing 3 or more conference games where they are now. You know what I mean? Like that's my thing. I don't know how that you've got SMU, Virginia, Clemson, Miami, Pitt, Syracuse, and Duke. That's 7 teams with 1 or 0 conference losses. All but one of those teams would have to lose at least 2 to 3 more games in conference for this scenario to happen. And I don't see how it happens. But if it did, that would be some crazy chaos. Crazy chaos.
Yeah.
Now what's interesting is, what team has the best chance to do that, actually, Trevor, is I believe it would actually be Stanford. No, hold on a second. It's even more than that. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 teams that have 1 or 0 losses in the ACC in conference play. Georgia Tech already has 2.
Because they lost to Louisville.
Right, because there's 5 teams that are currently undefeated in the conference. Right? So that I just don't see how that would happen. No. I don't. Stanford at 1 and 2 is a team that could go have 4 losses and be in, because they're 2 and 3. If Stanford lost to Notre Dame and then ran the table, they'd be 8 and 4, but they'd only have 2 losses in their league. They might have a chance to get in, but even then, that's going to be difficult. Because there's no way for Georgia. Well, the other thing. Well, you know what? Actually, I take that back, because I forgot about the Georgia game at the end of the year. So they don't actually have to get a third conference loss. I totally screwed that up. I forgot that they also play Georgia at the end of the year. So he's saying they lose to Notre Dame and Georgia, and then get in. I didn't even think about that. Trev. That would change things a little bit, because they go 8 and 4, but only have 2 losses in the league.
Right.
That's more doable. But even then, you'd need Louisville to lose 2 more games in the league. You know what I mean? Because they beat you head to head. They beat Georgia Tech head to head. So Louisville would have to lose 2 more conference games, because they already beat Georgia Tech. So it's still unlikely, but I forgot about the fact they could get 2 non-conference losses and run the table and be in. That'd be a little nuts. Yep. Good stuff. Let me get to I wanted to get to that one before we got out of here, Trevor. And there was one other that I wanted to find that I thought would be there were so many great questions, guys, and I'm sorry we can't get to all of them. There's a lot of great mashups. There's Connor O'Doherty had a great question. Hey, Connor O'Doherty, if you're listening to this, do me a favor, bring your hypothetical one up later or next week if you can remember. If you can remember that one, I would like to get to that. DMND13, you had a recruiting question I think would be really good for the board. 2 of them, so if you could take those to the board, I'd appreciate that. Here's the one I wanted to get to. Here we go.
John A1. If Joe Alt and Blake Fisher return for year 4, would Notre Dame's O-line play to its talent potential?
If Blake Fisher and Joe Alt both came back this season, Notre Dame would be 5-0, and they would have yet to have played a competitive football game. I mean, I don't know that they would have had a game within 17 points right now. Like, I don't think that's even close. Because you'd still have Ashton Craig, Billy Schrouth would have started. Who knows? Maybe they would have moved Emil Wagner inside. Maybe they would have moved Anthony Knapp inside. I mean, who? Maybe they would have moved Charles Jagasaw inside to guard, and he would have been starting to guard, not tackle on the play he got hurt. I mean, who knows? But if we're talking hypotheticals, if Joe Alt and Blake Fisher both come back, your starting offensive line left to right at the start of the season, barring injury, would have been Joe Alt, Charles Jagasaw, Ashton Craig, Billy Schrouth, and Blake Fisher.
It's a massive offensive line.
That's a freaking yes.
You got 6'8", 320 at left tackle. You got 6'7", 315 at left guard.
330.
330. Yep. 6'4", 305 at center, right guard. Billy Schrouth goes, 6'5", 320, 325. Blake Fisher was 6'6", 330. Those are some big boys, man.
Your smallest guy would have been Ashton Craig at 6'4", almost 310.
Yeah.
By far your smallest guy. And it's an incredibly talented offensive line. And even if Jagasaw still got hurt and you replaced him with Sam Pendleton, who's now sandwiched between Ashton Craig and Joe Alt, and even if Billy Schrouth and Jagasaw and Craig all got hurt, you'd still have Blake Fisher at right guard, Joe Alt at left tackle. With the issues you're having at guard, you're still really good on your offensive line. You'd have the best offensive lineman in college football at left tackle. Like, that offensive line would be, like John A. once he said, that would be good, but but with the talent, they should be the best offensive line in the country. Would they be good or actually the best? I think they'd be the best offensive line in college football. I do. Because the thing that Joe Rudolph showed this offseason that he didn't last year, that he made the mistake, was he played veterans because they were veterans.
Yeah.
And that was a mistake. He didn't do that this year. Now, I don't know if that was his choice, Marcus Freeman's choice, if it was Mike Denbrock's choice. I don't know whose it was, but they would have absolutely moved. They had already moved Charles Jagsaw into guard late last season. Remember, when he played against Stanford in the last game of the regular season, he came in at left guard, not tackle.
He did.
And so they didn't move him back out to tackle till Joe Alt left and Blake Fisher left. So you would have seen Billy Schrauth starting because Billy started late in the year. And like the decision to start them coming into the season had already been made. Like they told Zeke Carrell before the season was over that, hey, man, just so you know, Ashton's going to be the center of the future. Like those decisions were already made. The only question would have been, well, who's going to start at left guard this year?
Mm-hmm.
Well, those things would have had nothing to do with Joe Alt and Blake Fisher. Those decisions were already made. Like this offseason, they went with him, with Sam Pendleton. So I think that would be the best offensive line in the country. They would be that group. And I don't have no doubt saying that. Because sometimes the talent is just too good for you to F up as a coach. Honestly, it just is. It just you can't screw that up. It's like Larry Coker. Larry Coker could not screw up the 01 Miami, the 2001 Miami team. Couldn't screw it up. No, he was a terrible coach. Even he couldn't screw that team up. Now, you saw he screwed it up a little bit in 2002, but the 01 team that won the title, there was no coach who was going to screw that one up. Nobody, not even Larry Coker.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing.
Brian Van Gorder couldn't even screw up that defense.
Yeah.
Because those players would have tied him up and stuffed him in a locker going out to a game, and Ed Reed would have been calling plays in that game. Like, let's be real about that.
Yeah.
Ed Reed would be like, I don't care what Van Gorder called. We're running this. You know what I mean? Jonathan Vilma would look sideline like, screw that call. And he would have made the calls in that game, and they would have been way better.
Yeah.
Thoughts?
No, I agree. They would have, without a doubt, have been the best offensive line in the country. Look, guys, sometimes it just comes down to timing.
Yep.
College football is a lot about timing and who gets hot at the right time, who stays, who decides to come back, and that's – I've thought about this one a lot gosh, that would have been great. I think there was we talked about it on IB Nation Sports Talk about how nobody even expected Blake Fisher to leave. I mean, even him coming back would have been interesting for this offensive line. So
because he'd be your starting left tackle right now.
Yeah, he would be.
And so always maddeningly, he was very inconsistent. I couldn't say that word. Maddeningly inconsistent, frustratingly inconsistent. But he would still be better than what you have. And then maybe Anthony Knapp could be playing his natural position. So you'd still have Emil Wagner at right tackle. You'd have Blake Fisher at left tackle, and you'd be better off. Maybe Anthony Knapp would have stepped in at center when Ashton Cray got hurt.
Yeah.
Or a more natural position.
Or you just let Jagasaw right out at left tackle, assuming he doesn't get hurt, and then just let Blake stay at right tackle, or if the Jagasaw industry still happens, you move Blake to left.
I think the way Emil played, from what I'm told, the way Emil played this summer in an early fall camp, that it would have probably been Fisher, Jagasaw, Craig, Schrauth, Emil at right tackle.
Gosh.
Because I think the only way you would have convinced Blake to come back is to say, we're going to move you to left tackle. I think that's the only way you could have convinced him to come back and play another year. But from what I'm told, he was done. There wasn't even an option. There was no talking him into anything. He was done. He was leaving. So, but yeah, that would have been interesting, man. It would have been great. So that's going to do it for today's show, everybody. Tons of great questions. If you're a premium board member, do me a favor. Will one of you guys go and start a mailbag follow-up thread? And if I didn't get to your question and you're a member, throw it in there. And then tonight, Trevor and I will go in there and answer as many of those as we can. I did follow up and answer there's a couple I got to get to, but a lot of the buy-sell holds we didn't get to. I've actually gone in there and answered a bunch of those on the message board. I got a couple more that I got to get to, but we'll do that. And I want to start doing more of that on the boards because we just can't. I mean, we still have 35 starred questions and we're 3 hours in. We got some guys coming over to work on our house, and I just can't do it longer than this. And I really apologize. But if you are a board member, go ahead and put those on there, and we'll get to those and answer those. That'll be fun. We'll do that over the weekend. So, hey, Trevor, thanks for being with me today, man. It was a pleasure as always. I'll see you all. I'll be on the post-game show tomorrow. So I look forward to seeing y'all on the post-game show tomorrow. Hit that like, folks. Like my guy Andre Tonsel said, hit that like, hit the subscribe, join the message board at board.irish breakdown. Most importantly, stay safe. Appreciate the blessings that we all have. Pray for our fellow brothers and sisters in Florida, North Carolina, and Tennessee and what they're going through, and help in any ways that you can. Enjoy yourselves. Enjoy the game tomorrow, and we'll talk to you all again on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.